minutes after 10. Good morning. Monday. Hope you had a lovely weekend. If you're very good, I'll tell you what gig I went to on Friday night. One of the finest gigs of my life, actually. And that's such a lovely thing to happen when you're 50. How old am I, Keith? 54, am I now? 50. Well, this has started well, hasn't it? This is it's like tuning into the sort of musings of Donald Trump tribute act. We will get on to the mental state of the president at 11 o'clock today. I've always been slightly wary of going all in on the mental acuity thing. I don't know why, given the way that other people spoke about Joe Biden, but it seems to me that if you don't have the qualifications or the diagnostic tools, it can be slightly choppy waters. But three commentators who I hold in very different regards, I would loosely say. One deeply admirable former newspaper editor, who is a bit of a journalistic hero of mine, one absolutely bonkers Brexiter, and one former Tory MP turned columnist who I always find thought-provoking and interesting, have all written pieces in the last few days suggesting that Donald Trump's mental state, mental fragility is now so serious that he should be removed as president. I just wonder why now. We may get onto that in the next hour of the programme. I think in the final hour, as things stand, we'll turn our attention back to these horrible attacks on synagogues that are understandably causing great fear and upset among British Jews, and try to work out how we can properly separate perfectly reasonable criticism of the Israeli regime with repulsion, perfectly necessary repulsion at acts of proper anti-Semitism. I have a sort of horrible feeling that those of us who are simultaneously repulsed by what's gone on in Gaza and repulsed by anti-Semitism have been squeezed out of the conversation almost entirely. I don't know why, but we shall unsqueeze ourselves after 12 o'clock today. But we begin with the Prime Minister. And I said something to you on Friday that I thought long and hard about sharing it with you. Well, as long and hard as I think about anything, which is usually about a minute and a half. But I am conscious of this thing that happens when I see the current government, the Labour government, behaving in ways that seem to me to be similar to the way that previous Tory governments behaved, because I was absolutely unstinting in my criticism and condemnation of the way that those previous Tory governments behaved. I think back to, today, for example, I was just wondering on the way down the stairs whether we know what happened with regards to Dominic Cummings being vetted. Did we ever get to the bottom of whether or not Dominic Cummings successfully passed developed vetting? Our brilliant guest on Friday, Callum Miller, explaining politicians themselves don't get vetted. So Boris Johnson partying with Russian spies while Foreign Secretary would not have been something that was poured over with a fine-tooth comb by the relevant authorities. But I remember some reports or rumours, but did we ever get to the bottom of what Dominic Cummings' security vetting status was? I ask only because I worry, I told you, didn't I, on Friday, I worry sometimes that I might bend too far towards criticism of the current government in order to prove that I'm not suffering from some form of footballification or some form of bias. And I didn't spend the whole weekend thinking about things, but I did spend the occasional moment over the course of the weekend just trying to get an objective handle on how big a deal this story is. I don't like the phrase stormtrooper. I only discovered it in the middle of last week, but it refers to people who are somewhat blind in their loyalty to the Prime Minister. They think that every criticism of him is a sort of Rupert Murdoch-inspired conspiracy, and that the sharpening of knives has been orchestrated and manipulated, and the poor guy can't get a break, and he's the best Prime Minister since Churchill, and if only they were better at communications, then everybody would realise that. I think that's a slightly ridiculous position. I think it's a kind of stone-cold ridiculous position. But I understand it. A sort of slight desperation to have a semblance of stability and normality after the madness that we've endured. Equally silly, staying on the left for a while, are the people that think every iota of evidence that Keir Starmer is imperfect is held up by some people as proof that Jeremy Corbyn was a man more sinned against than sinning, which is, again, a position that is impossible to sustain with any form of logic. But we're not really talking about logic, are we? We're talking about emotions here. So those two positions are relatively silly. Keir Starmer is absolutely awful. He's the Antichrist, is a position held by many on the left. And similarly, he's not a very naughty boy. He's the Messiah, is a position held by people who traditionally would have voted for the same party. And it does mean that and then, of course, you've got the distorting lens of right-wing media, which we all have to rely on. Right? It's sad but true. I had a big insight about the BBC this weekend. Do remind me to share it with you. But it's sad but true that we all rely to some degree on media that is editorially dominated by right-wing beliefs, by right-wing politics, by right-wing writers. I mean, it is frankly hilarious how hard it is to assemble in your own mind a list of, say, 5 people with high-profile positions in the UK media espousing essentially liberal or leftish positions, while you could probably name 100 from the right without drawing breath. So inevitably, that sort of skews us all. It creates an ecosystem, an environment in which we all... we don't dance to their tune, but we certainly hear it more loudly than we do any other. So then I worry that my own conviction on Friday that this was a really big deal and potentially career-ending for Keir Starmer is partly as a response to not wanting to be as hypocritical and as biased as many Boris Johnson cheerleaders were a few years ago, but also a consequence of having to rely upon hideously biased media for all accounts, or even for my understanding of what is going on. And that's why today I'm still fascinated by the question of how serious this transgression is. If he lied and it is proved or it emerges, if he lied knowingly, and you can't really lie unknowingly, you can say something not true by accident. Despite Kemi Badenoch, but I love Kemi Badenoch. I probably shouldn't admit to this live on the radio, but goodness me, if I ever hear that she's popping up on a programme, or I'll turn the volume up. There's something just inspirational about her utter detachment from reality. Has there ever been a less self-aware public figure in this country in your lifetime? It's magnificent to watch. I feel almost sort of boosted by her detachment from reality. It's like an example to us all. You could live like that. I reckon I could drive a Formula One car to victory in a Grand Prix if I had Kemi Badenoch's levels of delusion and detachment from reality. So despite her best efforts, I don't think anybody is currently of the view that, probably including her, despite what she says, I don't think anybody is currently of the view that Keir Starmer lied. If he had knowingly lied, if he had knowingly misled Parliament, then he would be toast. And it doesn't matter. We touched on this on Friday as well, didn't we? It doesn't matter that previous regimes, previous administrations have moved heaven and earth to protect themselves and each other when they have broken the ministerial code. I think probably most obviously it would be Boris Johnson responding to Priti Patel being a bully, not Priti Patel being fired by Theresa May for having secret meetings with a foreign government without telling the actual Prime Minister, but Priti Patel being found to be a bully by an independent inquiry, and Boris Johnson instructing everybody on the team to protect her, to form a square around her. So just because previous administrations treated breaches of the ministerial code with absolute contempt and derision doesn't mean that we should, of course. It means that they have to be better, to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, when they go low, we go high. So you've got all of those things jostling for prominence, all of those things jostling for attention, and a danger, because of all that noise, of losing sight of how serious this actually is. You step away from the noise, the tabloid noise. the phone-in noise even a little bit, the right-wing noise, the left-wing noise, the stormtrooper noise, well, let's just say the loyalist noise. Everybody's shouting quite loudly. Some people shouting, Kemi Badenoch's crew shouting that this is, obviously staying silent about all of the appalling conduct that they either endorsed or were complicit in or stayed silent about at the time, pretending that Keir Starmer is some sort of vile transgressor of political norms. That's clearly not true. Then you've got the people shouting very loudly that he's done absolutely nothing wrong, and this is all evidence of conspiracies and hideous bias and unfairness. They're shouting very loudly as well. And then you've got the media that loves nothing more than chaos and has done now for the best part of 10 years. We're all addicted to chaos. And therefore the once unthinkable almost notion of a Prime Minister being hounded out of office by their own conduct or their own MPs, that's become relatively normal now. It happened two out of the last three Prime Ministers it actually happened to. When I was growing up, it was almost unheard of. Margaret Thatcher probably being the most obvious example of it, to lose your leadership without losing an election. Close to unthinkable, but here we are now. 2 out of the last 3 have been in that category. So the media and the public have become a little bit addicted to the idea, and that's 3 crowds: the loyalists, the denialists, the chaos theorists. There's probably more crowds as well. Under all of the readings of this situation, the truth sometimes gets buried. So I just want to collect, I think it was Michelle Obama, not Hillary Clinton, that said, when they go low, we go high. My apologies. I think I just want to get a proper, objective, grown-up, informed handle on how big a deal this is, right? Keir Starmer repeatedly stated that Peter Mandelson had passed his vetting, that due process had been followed. We now know that that was not true. We also know, unless something very unexpected emerges in the next few hours, we also know that he didn't know it was not true. That the civil service, for whatever reason, most probably because they bend to the will of the top man, they work out what they think the Prime Minister wants and do everything they can to deliver it. They didn't tell him that Peter Mandelson had failed developed vetting. So he waltzed off to Washington with access to classified material, potentially, despite the security services having concluded that he should not have had it, that he was some form of security risk. I suspect a little more with a reference to his Chinese and Russian associations than anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but that's something else we may never discover. Prime Minister stands up, states that his new ambassador has got the gig and has been vetted. It turns out he hasn't, although no one at the moment is claiming that he knew that when he made his claims. How big a deal is this? And what I like about having this conversation today is that we've had a couple of days of dust settling. It felt to me on Friday huge. It doesn't... I kind of need you to either reinflate my anger or upset or whatever it is, or indeed to do a Michael Winner and tell me to calm down, dear. Seriously, you know the facts now. We've had time to cogitate and contemplate. In isolation, if you remove it from everything else, in isolation, where does this sit on the scale of political scandals? Do you know, I've got a feeling, and I could be completely wrong here. I've got a feeling that this is not going to be it's going to be remembered, isn't it? Because the resignation over Epstein is what's going to be remembered a year from now or 2 years from now. I've got I don't like the phrase "nothing burger," but it does fit the bill sometimes, doesn't it? It's got a nice sort of ring to it. I just wonder, when you remove all of that noise, the sort of deluded denialists, the Tories who've presided over infinitely worse conduct and had absolutely nothing to say about any of it, the Starmer loyalists who think that every single thing he ever gets wrong is the consequence of some hideous conspiracy and that he is a man infinitely more sinned against than sinning. The chaos theorists who, and I've got a horrible feeling I sometimes veer into this territory, who rub our hands with glee at the idea of having more content, more input. Remove all of that from the conversation. What are you left with? Honestly, where does this sit? You just give me a number if you want, on a scale of 1 to 10. In the context, in the history, in the annals of political scandals, Keir Starmer, not knowing that Peter Mandelson had failed his developed vetting and telling various institutions and individuals that due process had been followed, where does this sit in your mind on the scandal scale? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 18 minutes after 10. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. That's it. I just want you to tell me. And listen, I'm entirely yours this morning. On Friday, I was surprised by how let down I felt by Keir Starmer. But someone asked me at Sunday lunch why. And I articulated why. And they sort of said, but that's a bit personal. That's not actually, you're not responding to his actual conduct. You're just responding to the mood, to the vibe, the idea that he would be the man that always got process right. And there's no evidence here that he didn't. He just wasn't across the information that he was sharing. I couldn't quite pin down whatever it was that I came on air with on Friday when I told you. I mean, we spent 3 hours talking about it, that this was both huge and deeply, deeply damaging. So I kind of want you to get me back there, if you can, to remind me why this is a much bigger deal than it feels today. Or, of course, to join me in wondering what all the fuss is actually about. 0345 6060 973. And part of the reason for this question is the dialing down of noise over the weekend. I thought it would get dialed up, but by this morning, it's not really even between the lines of much of the coverage, even in the insane newspapers like the Daily Mail. The baying for blood, the idea that he won't survive this, seems to me to have sailed, which makes me wonder whether we all got a little bit carried away at the end of last week and normality or good sense is being restored this morning. So go on, how big a deal is it and why? For you, personally, 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I also wonder what you want to know, what you want to do today, what do you want to emerge, what do you need before you can fully form your view of this story? Because I can't remember the last time this happened, and I'm a little bit embarrassed by some of the context. So on Friday, I was very much... I can see where the negative views of Keir Starmer come from, the ones that were in place before Friday. The speed with which he sacked Ollie Robbins, the way in which nothing's ever his fault. It's not quite Shaggy territory. Because he is talking about how furious he is and nobody told me. At what point does the buck stop with the actual Prime Minister? So I'm beginning to get a better handle on some of the dissatisfaction and unhappiness on a very personal ad hominem level with Keir Starmer. And this story will add to that. But this actual episode on Friday looked like it might be career-ending. By Monday, it appears to be relatively low-key. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You tell me why we should actually be sharpening our cudgels and baying for blood, or what it is you want to find out later today that will allow you to form a full and frank conclusion. Alex is in Tooting. Alex, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Alex. Very well, Alex. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, I've got another of my theories for you. But anyway, the thing I'm really interested in is actually the process by which these decisions and the vetting was actually made. I would like to know actually what the process was.
Yes. Which bits would you like to know?
Well, the whole process. And
we covered quite a lot of it on Friday with Callum Miller, who used to work in the Cabinet Office and is very au fait with what would have happened.
But also I wanted to know who sets up the process, when was it set up, and how often is it validated? Because if this is a process, for example, that actually has carried on since the time of the previous government, then actually surely they must take some responsibility for that as well. So that's my first thing. The other thing is I think it's not such a great big problem for Starmer, because actually I think, as he's shown in the last few weeks over the conflict in the Middle East, I think he's someone who actually does assess a lot of evidence, does it very, very carefully. He has a lawyer's mind.
Well, I'm going off this argument. There's nothing personal to you, but I mean, he's not doing a very good job as a lawyer on this occasion, is he? This is not very lawyerly behaviour. If this was a case and he'd brought a witness into court and made announcements without triple checking that turned out to be untrue, that were contradicted in the witness box by the actual witness. He said, oh, the witness was at McDonald's at 10 o'clock on Thursday, and the witness arrives in the witness box and says, well, actually, no, I wasn't. Then we wouldn't be sitting here going, oh, yes, he's got a wonderful legal mind, he's such across the detail, he's a real process man. And this is evidence of the opposite.
I'm not sure.
Of course it is. He passed vetting and he didn't pass vetting.
Okay, well, that aside, I mean, to answer your initial question, what do I want to know?
Yes.
I want to know far more about the process, who sets that up, who actually reassesses the process, and how often that actually happens. And I think actually that's core to the whole thing.
Yeah, but you would want to know all of that prior to this event happening. This is all information that would be interesting.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah, okay. And what would, for you, constitute a smoking gun or a coffin nail for the current Prime Minister?
I don't think this is personally, I don't think this is something that's going to do for him.
So, Ollie Robbins, nor do I now. But why did I on Friday? Actually, that's a question for my psychologist, not for you. What?
Well, you see, I was quite cross with you on Friday because I thought, oh, this is such a storm in a teacup, blah, blah, blah.
Did you?
Yes.
Sorry.
Nobody's have to apologise.
I do have to apologise. Nobody's perfect, Alex. Ollie Robbins, as I read at the weekend, believes he wasn't allowed to tell Kirsten. That's the kind of thing you want to find out more about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that is a bit bonkers, isn't it? So we've done a vetting on your new ambassador. It turns out he's a wrong 'un, but we can't tell you. How does that work? I mean, that's what Alex is talking about. This is the kind of stuff that sort of... It doesn't paint Starmer in a bad light if it's true that Ollie Robbins isn't allowed to tell him. But if he's not allowed to tell him, Starmer shouldn't have sacked him. I mean, he's absolutely right. This is like Kremlinology. How can you sack someone for doing their job correctly? If his job entails he's not allowed to tell the Prime Minister that a diplomat has failed, oh, man alive. But the more you talk about it, the more you wonder whether actually it is just a storm in a teacup. And this is where... There's a reason I apologise to Alex, because I kind of warned you on Friday that I'd try so hard not to be the sort of client journalist shill for Labour that so many people were for the Tories, which of course ended up with them defending Boris Johnson even as he was breaking laws and promises and lying as if it was going out of fashion. And of course a lot of those people got so addicted to the depravity that they ended up cheerleading for Donald Trump and using phrases like Trump derangement syndrome to describe people who were telling the truth. So you sort of guard so hard against going even a few paces down that road that you end up making the opposite mistake, which is seeing scandal where perhaps there wasn't much. NJ is in Cheddar in Somerset. NJ, what would you like to say?
I'm in the same. I think it's a storm in a teacup. I've been through SV checking before. Yeah. I mean, I was at role as a police officer. I mean, I did 32 years in security services, a specialist firearms officer, instructor for the police, and also did close protection as well, so looking after royalty and also looking after government people.
Okay.
So the storm in the teacup thing for me is, if you put in for your vetting and that goes up to the vetting agency and then it comes back, you get told that you're failed. So he would have known that he'd have failed, for one.
Mandelson would have done.
Yes, he'd have been told that he'd failed. 100% he'd have been told that he'd failed. He wouldn't have been told the reasons why he's failed, and this is why...
Well, you can't say 100%. Well, I mean, do we not... Are you sure? Are you 150% sure?
I'm talking about my level of...
Oh, okay. So, because I can't quite believe Mandelson got told he'd failed to develop vetting.
I kind of disagree, because...
Oh, okay.
And the only reason I say that is because, like, people are going, you can't say why you failed. That is true. So if for instance, a third party, for instance, said he was a drink driver or said he was a risk to something, he may still fail, but you would never know who that person was because that's against the law.
Okay, I think Mandelson has let it be known that he didn't know.
Well,
but then who can believe a word that he says anyway? That's the whole point, isn't it?
I've just slightly high-fived you there.
Thank you very much.
In my personal, humble view, I think, I kind of know, and I've got friends who've worked in different places and stuff. If you fail your DB, you get told, and then the job will then tell you that you failed. The only way that you can then, say for instance, in a police force, if you fail that, the person that holds the rights for appeal is the deputy chief constable, not the chief, the deputy chief constable, and then you can apply for them to go to have this looked at again. So the DV works differently through the security services, although there is still that chain of command of where they would know. So Starmer might not have known. He might not have known. He might have actually been told, and this is the weirdest thing, that he passed because Robbins may have said, you know what, after all these checks and stuff, ticking the green box is okay. Because...
Well, that's what Starmer got told.
Yeah, and that's why
okay, I don't know if it's very professional of me to ask you this question. What happened to us on Friday? Well, what happened to me on Friday, then?
You got sucked in, my friend.
Did I?
And, yeah, I believe so. You got sucked in, and everyone was like, ooh. Everyone like, at the moment, someone to be criticised, fall on the bandwagon, go down that route. I mean, yeah, Trump is a psycho, but let's talk about that later.
We are, actually. That's in the next hour of the programme. It's almost like you've been privy to our production meeting, such as it is. Which is just Eleanor and I chewing the fat as we walk upstairs. Is it upstairs or downstairs? That bit there, I mean, I got sucked in. The Prime Minister told the House of Commons that Peter Mandelson's appointment had been entirely respectable, and he failed develop. That's what I thought was a huge deal, and it still is a huge deal. But it's not, and this is where the dust has settled over the weekend. It's not as damaging to Starmer as it felt on Friday. I don't know that we got sucked in. I think we just got carried away. If that's a different thing at all.
Well, I think it's similar. Similar, maybe the same, although it's a different word. If I'd be surprised if Starmer resigns and goes.
He's not going. I don't think he's going anywhere, and I don't think he should now. Whereas on Friday, I thought it was 52-48 that he would go and should go. So I don't know. I've done this job for long enough. I think I'll let you decide on this, NJ. Have I earned the right once or twice a year to ask my callers to account for my own mistakes?
100%.
Thank you very much. So why did I get it so wrong on Friday? 0345 6060 973. If, of course, indeed I did. It may well be that the pendulum swings back in the course of the next few minutes. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. It's extraordinary how many people listening to this programme have been through developed vetting. Or not extraordinary, I don't know, but I haven't. Mark has, as part of my duties in the army. I can tell you it's absolutely rubbish to state that the Prime Minister could not have been told that Mandelson had not passed developed vetting. It's true that he could not be told the reason why he failed, but he could certainly have been told that it had been failed, and that would have been enough. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. Yes, it does, but does the stench attach itself to Starmer? And I'm increasingly of the view this morning that it doesn't particularly. He adds, Mark in St Albans, as per your previous caller, Mandelson would have been told that he failed, but even he would not have been told the reason why. I mean, again, the police, the army, the fields of experience that my contributors are drawing on so far do not include the diplomatic service, but you have to presume that there would be crossover, don't you? And that's why I can't. If I did this every day, it would be absolutely disgraceful. But what happened on Friday, when it wasn't just me, it was a fairly balanced show, wasn't it? It was a fairly equal split between people who thought Starmer could and should be toast, and people who didn't. There was very few people who were 100% nothing burger. There's absolutely nothing to see here. There were some. So what? I mean, did we fall into a trap of our own making? I'm not sure. Nadia puts it well. Keir Starmer was told due process had been followed and completed, which is true. He was not, however, told the result of the vetting that Mandelson had failed. So to be fair to Starmer, he didn't mislead Parliament, as due process had been followed, which it had. And all this will end, says David, as a damp squib, and we'll all realise we've wasted our weekend discussing it non-stop. Speak for yourself, David. I saw James live at the O2 on Friday night. I was talking about that for most of the weekend. How do you manage to have a band that is, over the course of almost 40 years, your most consistent favourite? The band that has brought you the most joy, the most solace, the most dance moves over the best part of 4 decades, and yet you've never got around to seeing them live. In the back of my mind, I thought I'd seen them live. I thought I saw them at Band on the Wall in Manchester a million years ago, but when I actually sat down on the tube on Friday to make my way to the O2, I did a sort of mental audit, and I thought, no, you didn't. You saw loads of bands there, and at the International, and at the Hacienda, but you never actually, I don't think I ever saw James live. And then on Friday night, I witnessed one of the finest concerts. You know, some bands just transcend when they're performing on stage. They are even more than they are on record. And James are very much in that category. Tim Boo, the frontman for the ages. And the rest of the lineup is a touch of the avant-garde. There's incredible virtuoso musicianship. The guitarist swaps out his guitar for a cello for a few tracks. I honestly, it made me feel 18 again. And I'll tell you what, if 18-year-old me, anyway, could hear me now. 10:38 is the time. Maria is in Liverpool. Steer us back to the politics, Maria. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. Right, just a couple of points.
Yes.
First of all, Angela Rayner. You know, she had to resign because she didn't take the right information.
Not quite. She had to resign because of the inquiry by the the independent ministerial advisor on ethics, saying that she'd made a boo-boo.
Yeah. So should Keir Starmer not report himself to that organisation to be investigated?
Yeah, absolutely. He may well.
Yeah. So that's what I'd like to see.
But that involves there being somebody somewhere accusing him of something, and at the moment there isn't. Nobody is saying, I told you, and you ignored it. No one is challenging his version of events. So I don't think this lands in quite the way that you thought it would.
I actually think it does. I think it's hypocritical that standards are set for some people and not for others.
So what are you accusing him of then?
I'm accusing him of not taking the advice that he should have took because...
But he wasn't given that advice. You can't take advice you haven't been given.
No, Mandelson was put in place before the vetting
was completed.
He shouldn't have done that. I worked in the civil service, James, and there is no way I would have been off. I was offered a number of jobs on promotion. There is no way I'd have been offered that job. In fact, I thought I'd lost one job because the vetting hadn't come through. You cannot take a job until that vetting is completed. And I went to the second stage of vetting, which took months. So the question I want answering is, why did he appoint Mandelson before the vetting, and was there any pressure to bear on him? Yeah, we know he did, but why? Because
everyone was setting a snake to catch a snake, weren't they? He was going to be the only man that could speak fluent Trump.
No, not necessarily.
Well, that's what we all said at the time.
No, that's what right-wing papers said at the time.
Lots of left-wing papers said it was a stroke of genius as well. Well, there aren't any really left-wing papers. No. I mean, most people thought that it was a really clever thing to do because Mandelson is so slimy and he would be able to Trump whisper.
Yeah, that's what the papers say. I want to hear what Starmer said.
Well, that will come out. That's a different, really oddly enough, that's the investigation that was prompted by Mandelson's resignation. That's the one that gets sent to the committee, isn't it? All the papers pertaining to the appointment, and we'll find out whether there was. When you say pressure brought to bear, you mean did the White House let it be known that they quite fancied having Mandelson in the embassy?
I think the White House told him to get Mandelson in the embassy because Mandelson knows far too much about the Epstein files.
Whoa.
I think that is the top and bottom of it, James. You may disagree, and we both have our opinions. But I really believe at that time, in last summer, when all this was taking place, don't forget, we had an excellent ambassador already in place.
We did, yes.
So
it's a fixed term, though, isn't it? Is it a fixed term, being an ambassador? Was she not coming to the end of a fixed term? I could be wrong with that.
It's never been said she was at the end of her term. No. And so they appointed Mandelson. That has never come into the conversation. So the conversation for me has to be around what happened last summer. He was bending over backwards to facilitate Trump, do whatever Trump wanted. I mean, he really was in Trump's pocket. In retrospect, to me, he was in Trump's pocket.
And at the time, we all thought that, well, I say we all, obviously not everybody did, but the idea that you had to appease the monster in the White House was fairly received wisdom, wasn't it? I think, you made me do something then. You made me go, whoa! When you mentioned Epstein, didn't you notice? I went, whoa! Because it's kind of like a knee-jerk reaction. But Trump is so utterly depraved. So utterly depraved, and well aware of exactly what his history of association with Epstein was, and almost certainly aware by now of exactly what he's accused of in the papers that the rest of us haven't seen, that the idea of bringing one of Epstein's best mates to Washington, D.C., actually, I don't think deserves to get filed under conspiracy theory, Maria. So I'd like, if with your permission, I'd like to withdraw my whoa.
No, you haven't got my permission, James. Sorry.
I want it back. Give it back.
Have another whoa, please.
Okay. No, I'm not having another. But so because I mean, all of the reasons, everyone's got this extraordinary amnesia about why they thought it was a good appointment in the first place. And the reason why they thought it was such a good appointment in the first place was exactly the same reason why it was such a bad appointment. This is the thing that I find absolutely hypnotic. Why was it a good appointment? Because he's dodgy and he's got, he's got some very strange associations and he's been extremely near over the years to all sorts of questionable characters and behaviours. Why is it such a bad appointment? Because he's dodgy and he's got all sorts of associations over the years with all sorts of questionable characters. It's extraordinary in the moment to reflect upon the fact that the reason why it was a good appointment when it was made is exactly the same reason why it was such a bad appointment when it all fell apart. But Maria's probably right to bring in some of those questions, some of those possibilities. How much of that comes out later today? Well, you're going to have to wait 10:45, 11, 12, carry 4, 3.5, 4.5, 4 hours and 45 minutes to find out.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There are two elements to this. I am intrigued by the personal animosity that Keir Starmer excites. The people who really, really dislike him. And some of that's down to social media. People out there who still think that he played some sort of role in Jimmy Savile's failed pursuit or failed prosecution, not least because Boris Johnson lied about it in the House of Commons. But there's a visceral nature to some of the negativity felt towards Keir Starmer, who's always, for many of us, his greatest failing has been that there's a sort of vanilla tone to him, that he is quite innocuous, and you want someone with a little bit more oomph. So it's odd that those two positions can be held so widely and so strongly when they appear to be contradictory. But if you look at the human element of what has happened since this latest episode in the Mandelson scandal broke, you perhaps get an inkling of why some people who might be more sympathetic towards the Labour Party have quite a depth of negativity towards Keir Starmer. He's not covered himself in glory. He's thrown Ollie Robbins under a bus, according to some of his civil service colleagues. He's sort of expressed fury and outrage, but just creating an idea that he's never actually responsible for anything that happens, and he's in charge. What's the opposite of a control freak? Have we got a phrase for that? Is there such a thing as the opposite of a control freak? He seems to be the opposite of a control freak, doesn't he? Is that he delegates everything. Everything is down to somebody else, up to and including, it would seem, decision-making. There's some policies that seem to be at odds with everything he stood for as a younger man, and yet they're now part of his actual government. So I get that. I can understand why personal feelings towards him may be hardening, but in the context of this particular episode of this particular scandal, we're almost all agreed, Maria in Liverpool notwithstanding, that this is a bit of a storm in a teacup, which makes me wonder what happened to me on Friday. Boris is in Luxembourg, not that one. Boris, what would you like to say?
Thanks, James, thanks very much for taking the call.
Good to hear from you.
I just can't believe we're even talking about this.
Really?
It's such a nothing.
Wait, just pause there. No, just pause there, and then come back at me. The ambassador to the United States of America failed his developed vetting and got sent there anyway.
Okay. Can we put this into perspective about what the Prime Minister has to appoint?
Yes.
Governmental ministers, 100 to 120 positions, including cabinet ministers, about 25.
Yes.
Parliamentarian aides, dozens of them, the whips. Public and quasi-governmental appointments he has to make, hundreds to the thousands. Senior civil services, hundreds again that he has to appoint. Honours and peerages. So we are now talking about the category of the senior civil service that he has to, which he doesn't even appoint directly because, as he's pointed out repeatedly, have to go through a process because of the independence of the civil service. So he has maybe failed in that one category of that one appointment to an ambassador to the United States. How important is that role compared to all the other things that he has to do? And how long was he in power?
It's pretty important.
Compared to your cabinet ministers? Compared to the hundreds of thousands of other appointments.
You're blowing my brains up. I can't decide whether you're being bonkers or brilliant.
But, James, how long has this guy been in power for? From February till September. I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, if you want to blow up every single time the guy makes a mistake like this, you might as well actually blow up the person who makes the formal appointment, which is your monarch, right? So is King Charles III responsible and he should resign? If every single time you make a mistake with any of these appointments, you have a new Prime Minister, you're going to finish off with a government less stable than I don't know, Banana Republic. I mean, worse than Italy for sure. I mean, if this is the best wicket that the right has to attack Starmer...
don't, mate. You're making me feel even stupider than I did already. So this is, for you, this is donkey sanctuary territory.
Absolutely nothing. And
really?
I mean, the guy made an appointment, the guy went there in February, and by September they looked at this and I said, well, this is a terrible decision, we're going to revise it. So it's not even that the guy's still in power or that he's been there for years. It's like 7 months. I mean, I just can't believe that, we have a war going on in Iran. We've got a financial living crisis. We've got probably a huge recession coming up. We've got potholes, which are more important than this. And what are we talking about? A guy that isn't even in power anymore, that was fired by the government. That I just don't get it. Why are you even talking about this? Why am I calling in to talk to you about this?
I don't know. Why are you, Boris? What's wrong with you? Why are you talking about this old rubbish? Well, because on Friday it felt like he could go.
Speechless.
Yeah, I can tell.
If you have Starmer go for this, good luck. I mean, you go back to the governments in Italy in the 50s and 60s, which, every year they had 2 or 3 governments. You're going to finish off in a worse situation. So, is that in the interest of Britain? I mean, seriously, the right has good arguments that they can put forward, and there are many things that are going wrong, and they should be focusing on this. To drag this old thing out with Mandelson from, when was it, February to September, it's just focus on real things.
I suspect that you're touching quite a lot of nerves out there, and a lot of people are
going to have a lot of calls in after that, trying to find something to attack Keir Starmer with, but this is not it.
Yes, I've got a feeling that you're right, and I mean, my feeling was crystallising already, as I've explained all morning, but I don't think anyone's put it quite as powerfully as you have, Boris. Thank you. And that, of course, is embarrassing because it means that in attempts years ago, someone's put it very kindly. This is from Nadia. I was a bit annoyed with you on Friday, James, except you do turn yourself inside out trying to be fair. Yes, I do, but it doesn't mean I get it right. And I was probably unfair on Friday in the opposite way to the way that I was worried about. Nadia then goes on to critique various colleagues and how hard they try to be fair, but it would be undiplomatic of me to share any of that, except to say that Nick Abbott comes out rather well. 10:54 is the time. Chris is in Maida Vale. Chris, what do you reckon?
Hey, James.
Hello,
first of all, very quickly, I agree with everything the last caller said.
Boris, I bet you do.
And basically, being politically agnostic.
Yes.
Secondly, I just want to sort of point out... the Financial Times, the front page of the FT was reporting this over the weekend. What we basically know is that Starmer said he didn't know.
Yeah.
As a consequence of that, he dismissed Ollie Robbins. What we know is that Ollie Robbins will obviously give evidence this week, and we'll learn more.
Tomorrow.
But basically, sources, according to the FT, sources close to Ollie Robbins are basically saying he couldn't tell ministers about the results of the check.
That's been challenged by some of my contributors who have gone through the developed vetting process.
With respect, I'm more likely to believe... what's important...
Hang on a minute. You're more likely to believe unnamed sources speaking to journalists on the Financial Times than you are to believe named sources speaking to a journalist on LBC.
First of all, the source in the FT is named as the former chief executive of the National Cyber Security Centre, an individual called Kieran Martin, and he is represented as to be a friend of Ollie Robbins.
Yes.
Now, his quote is most likely the defence that Ollie Robbins is going to use. That's why it's relevant. And he specifically said, not only is there no duty to disclose the details of the vetting case, there is a duty not to disclose them. So he's a friend of Ollie Robbins, and he is saying that, and that could be Ollie Robbins' line.
That is probably going to be his defence. I mean, what it refers to is the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act from 2010, the external bit of it. The Secretary of State, I'm quoting now, has the power to manage the diplomatic service, but they do not cover national security vetting. And so, I mean, they're talking about the Foreign Secretary there, and the law states he should be discreet with information gathered during vetting. I don't think it goes as far as to say he categorically and cannot ever share information gathered during vetting.
James,
yes.
Where I come from is that if Kieran Martin is basically sort of saying, well, he didn't have a duty to disclose, and that happens, and then he got fired for it. That happens to be Ollie Robbins' defence. Ollie Robbins is sort of saying, you shouldn't have dismissed me because I didn't have a duty to disclose.
Yeah, and I'm saying...
down that train of thought,
go on.
It's basically vindicating Keir Starmer's version of events.
Yes, I think you're right. Except for, I guess it is vindicating Keir Starmer's version of events. The only thing it overlooks, and this will be a question for the personnel department, actually, in the event of Ollie Robbins appealing against his dismissal, he had no duty to tell the Prime Minister, but he was not forbidden from doing so. I think that is where this is going. With
respect, that's a different question.
Well, precisely. I've got you with respect. That's why I'm pointing it out, because it is an interesting, different perspective.
And then people who attack Keir Starmer go down a different route.
Yes.
If Ollie Robbins didn't reveal that information, was Keir Starmer incompetent for not asking the question?
Yeah.
And I think that's a ridiculous argument, because there's something known as reporting by exception. You get, as someone in a senior role, you don't expect someone to sort of pitch up every day and say, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine.
Yes.
All you want are problems being brought to your attention. So, for example, when you appeared at 10 o'clock on the radio, I bet you didn't go around asking everyone, is that wire plugged in? Is that wire plugged in, etc.
No.
You just assumed that if it wasn't, they would tell you.
Keith, is that wire plugged in? Yeah, we're all good. It's all okay, Chris. Carry on. Everyone can hear you. But so you just have. So I did touch on this on Friday. Has there been a precedent for a Prime Minister being told that somebody that the appointment can go ahead, or saying someone's passed their vetting, and the Prime Minister says, "Don't believe you, prove it." And that takes us back to Boris's point. There'd never be time to do anything else if you were asking to see everybody's homework all the time.
And the real question might be, if it is the case that Ollie Robbins was not obliged, to actually disclose the failure of vetting to ministers, why is that? Because it does sound as if it should be an important thing to disclose to ministers.
You would think so, wouldn't you? This is, I think, where the earlier caller was curious to find out a lot more about what the precedent and what the practice is. I'll tell you what, under this reading, and probably where the whole conversation is going to end up, with Boris's insistence that we should never have had it in the first place, notwithstanding, it's going to be the sacking of Ollie Robbins that ends up looking the worst of all the jigsaw pieces so far.
I agree completely.
We got there in the end. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I mean, we all got there in the end to something on which I think you could probably hang your hat. And that is, I don't know what word you prefer, but that's what I was trying to reference when I talked about personnel issues or the human element of it. Is it a peevishness on Keir Starmer's part? Is it a petulance to just lash out and sack someone without going through all of the detail, without being the thing that he was supposed to be all the time, which is loyally? And that, I think, is why some people feel the scales falling from their eyes with regards to the Prime Minister on a personal level, as opposed perhaps to a political one. Speaking of scales falling from eyes, I won't tell you who they are yet. I'll tell you immediately after the news. 3 very different contributors, all concluding that Donald Trump is mad.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's a very personal problem. Here's I mean, it's very much a first world problem, but it's also something that I don't think many people are going to have been worrying about. If you have been contending for some time that Donald Trump is... what language are you comfortable with? Listen, you know how to get in touch with the programme. 84850 is the text number, or you can WhatsApp me on 03456060973. If you just want to give me a bit of help with something without necessarily wanting your message to be read out, then do feel free, because I don't want to unintentionally cause offence by using language that refers to mental fragility or mental collapse, or you know, because I use words like bonkers quite casually, or madness. I don't know that there is anything to be particularly worried about or hypersensitive about here, but if you think there is, then do please make your case, and I will respond accordingly. I have absolutely no problem with causing intentional offence. I want to make that absolutely clear, but I don't always enjoy causing unintentional. In fact, I very rarely enjoy causing unintentional offence. But what language have we used so far to describe Donald Trump? I think the day that we went all in on, I don't know why I'm talking like a member of the royal family and using we, the day I went all in on deranged liar, it wasn't that long ago. It's an extraordinary moment of liberation when you stop thinking that there's a master plan, or you stop thinking that Donald Trump is moments away from restoring normality, restoring a semblance of decency, when you stop thinking that the bad behaviour is an aberration and the status quo will be restored. It is a strange moment, and in many ways, despite having gone quite early on it compared to other people in my profession, we still went quite late. You know, still thinking during the state visit, for example, well, maybe this will nudge him into a place where he stops being so mad, where he stops being so petulant, he stops being so unhinged, he stops being so erratic, he stops being so unpredictable. Maybe cozying up to him at the state visit, I think this was Keir Starmer's calculation, will be enough to sort of shock him into decency. Do you see what I mean? Like a sort of electric shock, and you've got a deranged patient and you give them an electric shock, and then lo and behold, they start behaving with a bit of decency again. So we went pretty early. And by we, I mean on this programme. I'm including you in the analysis. And, I mean, remember that this was at a time when some people, like Dick Littlejohn in the Daily Mail, were writing about how they wished Donald Trump was the UK Prime Minister, and he'd never been more ashamed to be British than when Starmer refused to get involved in an illegal war. So, you know, there were plenty of people still in the media, still using phrases like Trump derangement syndrome to describe those of us describing Trump's derangement. And there's something there for the PhD thesis writers of the future to look at. What on earth would possess someone commenting on current affairs to attack the people describing a mad president instead of attacking the mad president? It's a conversation for another day. He's playing 4D Snap, not 4D chess. That's rather nice. Except he's not, is he? Because that has rules as well. So we went early on calling him deranged, on calling him mad. That's not a diagnosis. And even if it were, it's not one that I'm qualified to give. Over the course of the last few days, 3 men who are prominent contributors to public discourse in this country. 3 men have all arrived at the same conclusion. And it is interesting because they are very, very different men. And they speak from very, very different positions. You have a crazy Brexiter, the wrongest man in the world, Daniel Hannan. You have one of the finest journalists this country has produced in the last 50 years, Alan Rusbridger, former editor of The Guardian and Prospect magazine. And you have one of my favourite columnists, despite the fact that he sometimes writes things that I balk at, Matthew Parris in The Times, a former Conservative MP from a wing of the Conservative Party that really, in its current guise, no longer exists. So 3 very, very different perspectives. Rusbridger, Parris, Hannan. The best editor of the last 50 years, my favourite columnist, and the wrongest man in the world. All 3 of them. These are the 3 headlines that have appeared in the last few days. Rusbridger first. I was already worried about Trump's mental decline. It just got worse. Matthew Parris in The Times. Trump is too deranged to continue in office. And then Daniel Hannan in the Washington Examiner. Donald Trump is losing his mind. So a consensus from 3 very, very different corners of commentary that Donald Trump is losing his mind or has lost his mind, that Donald Trump is mad. Not that Donald Trump is erratic or unpredictable or difficult to work with, but he is actively mad, as in there is no way of imposing comprehension upon his conduct. It makes no sense. It is mad. Donald Trump has gone mad. 2 very sober voices and 1 hat stand. Daniel Hatstand, the world's wrongest man. But in the spirit of stopped clocks, even they are right twice a day. So, I told you a while ago, didn't I, that if I ever announced on the radio that I was thinking of writing another book, you had to take me out and shoot me. I'd like to withdraw that, if I may, because I am now thinking of writing another book. And part of the reason for it is the damage that's been done to our country by outsiders. I really came into sharp focus, this idea, when I was looking at the full extent of Viktor Orban's attempt to influence public conversation, to influence politics in this country and the United States of America. So sometimes when I'm in book mode, and I may not write it, I don't know yet, but I'm certainly thinking about it. When you're in book mode, you just spot things, like moments. I like to open a chapter with a date. I like to pick a moment and then work back from it. And last week, you had the Secretary of State for War claiming to quote the Bible when he actually quoted words from the Quentin Tarantino film Pulp Fiction. You had the Secretary of State for Health revealing, I don't think this needs a trigger warning unless you're a raccoon, that he once cut off a raccoon's penis and took it home so that he could study it later. That's a sort of roadkill raccoon. And there was a third element of this triangle. I made a note of it at the time because this could be an opening to a chapter, a moment when the planets aligned in such a way. Who would the other one have been? What else has happened this week? So that's Hegseth, Kennedy, and it'll come to me in about 4 minutes' time because there was something else that happened that just pointed to a scenario, to a world that is beyond all recognition. I mean, it is literally beyond all analysis, beyond all precedent. Kash Patel, the reports about the head of the FBI that emerged towards the end of last week that were absolutely mind-boggling, about him being paranoid and allegedly being drunk in office and chasing demons and butterflies, metaphorically speaking, all around the place. So 3 of the most powerful men in the United States of America, one of them encountered a dead raccoon, got out of the car, cut its penis off and took it home. One of them likes to give sermons and claim that the US military acts according to God's will, which of course makes him a religious extremist of exactly the type that we are encouraged to detest in Iran. Claims to be quoting the Bible when he actually quotes Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction. And one of them is, according to reports, I think in the Washington Post, off his nut. And they've all been put in position by Donald Trump before he was widely regarded to be mad. Then you turn your attention to Trump. And, I mean, what would you even pick as evidence of escalation? Because we have sat here now for a long time pointing out how hard it is to keep up. But something changed last week in that a new dimension emerged where it wasn't being overcome and subsumed by the next big announcement. For me, the Jesus picture, that was a moment of almost unbelievable madness. I'm going to post a picture of myself portrayed as Jesus. The message that he posted about Iran using foul language and praising Allah, that seemed to me to be marks of a level of madness not previously reached by Donald Trump. And then he turned upon his former cheerleaders, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens and Alex Jones, calling them in capital letters nut jobs and losers with low IQ. It was in The Atlantic, that reporting about Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, and he revealed on Sunday he's going to sue them for defamation after the magazine published a story about his alleged drinking habits. That, he told Fox News yesterday, will come today. Vehemently denies the allegations. We shall see. But those are the three things that happened over the course of the last 3 days that just highlighted what Donald Trump has around him, or who Donald Trump has around him. What he himself has done is, well, extraordinary even by his standards. The Jesus image, the extraordinarily foul-mouthed attack upon Iran, and I mean, never mind the usual stuff, the toing and froing about whether this, and the attack on the Pope, that was the thing. So these are the reasons why Daniel Hannan, Matthew Parris and Alan Rusbridger have all gone there. And it's a place they've gone to that even 6 months ago, I always felt a little bit uncomfortable about it. Not because of the mental health element, not because of being insensitive about mental health in general, but just because it felt, I don't know, it felt too big to do. You can't accuse the president of being insane. You can't accuse the President of the United States of America of being mad. So about 6 months ago, it felt too big. At the time, of course, the worst commentators in the world were describing people telling the truth as having Trump derangement syndrome. I wonder if there was some projection there. Do you think maybe they could smell the madness in the wind, but they'd staked so much on Donald Trump because they loved the racism so much and the misogyny, the sexism and the climate change denial? Do you think that kind of commentator just kind of knew things were going? I can't believe I've staked everything on him. He's mad. I know what I'll do. I'll accuse all the people calling him mad of being mad. Do you think there's a little bit of that going on? I don't know. I mean, I've heard people accuse critics of Donald Trump of loving the Ayatollahs in Iran, as if you can't hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. So if you bet the lot, if you staked your entire reputation, such as it is, on Donald Trump being a good guy, because you love the racism, you love the sexism, and you love the climate change denial, drill, baby, drill, then when you begin to fear that he is actually mad, he is all of the things that his critics have been saying for ages, then you have little choice but to accuse his critics of being mad. There is, isn't there? That's it. It's dropped, the penny. That's what happened, isn't it? Because it's such a strange phrase to use, Trump derangement syndrome. It happened with Brexit, of course. You back Brexit so strongly that when the evidence emerges that all of the people condemning it were right, you have to attack them. You can't argue with them anymore. You can't have a debate anymore, so you have to attack them. You have to question their mental health. Here are people calling Donald Trump mad. Oh, my God, I think they're right. No, you're mad. You're the mad one. You've got Trump derangement syndrome and you love the Ayatollahs. That is a sort of mental somersault, so violent that it's extraordinary that these people can lie straight in bed. But that, I think, is what happened. Maybe they got there a bit earlier than the rest of us. We're too busy being all liberal and concerned about feelings and good conduct. I'm not actually going to call him mad. He looks a bit mad, but I can't actually say that he's gone mad. Whereas the people that loved him, because of the racism, the misogyny and the climate change denial, they're beginning to recognise that he's gone mad. So they have to write a newspaper column saying, I wish he was my leader and you're all mad, you people suggesting that he might be mad. I don't know, I'm thinking out loud. Every accusation is a confession is a phrase that springs to mind. It's a weird phrase to use, Trump derangement syndrome. As if describing a deranged man is a sign itself of... Anyway, I don't know. The insanity of the most powerful political leader in the world posting an AI image of himself dressed up as the Son of God, healing the sick, is impossible to convey. We probably didn't feel it land as heavily as it would do, as it should do, because it comes on the back of so many other transgressions and so many other aberrations. But simply put, I'm going to read that again. This is from Alan Rusbridger's piece. The most powerful political leader in the world posted an AI image of himself dressed up as the Son of God healing the sick. And then lied about it subsequently. But it's the moment of pressing send. It's the moment of seeing it. And that is, I mean, grounds for an intervention. Rusbridger goes on, in most places, the HR department would be looking at a twin-track policy of support and protection. A leader who behaved so aberrantly that it became routine for observers to suggest that they had lost their marbles. I mean, it's there. And then you have the attack on the actual Pope, and then you have that extraordinary succession of announcements on social media that, in any other circumstances, would probably have prompted an intervention. Memes, news clips. This is quite good. He's not sleeping. He's pretending to be Jesus, and he's posting all night. He's not well. So, what's happened this week, and just in the last week, is it? We're talking about a week? The last 10 days that makes you think that the President of the United States of America has lost his mind? What is the collection of behaviours, circumstances, observations? For the first time, it feels to me that the flooding of the zone, the constant avalanche of awfulness, has somehow failed. We are not sitting here thinking, oh, here he goes again. We're sitting here thinking something even worse than what went before has happened. I give you the attack on the Pope. I give you the pretending to be Jesus. I give you the incredible post about Iran, calling them, well, you read it, using the F word, the attacks upon his former allies. What makes you conclude? What is it that's happened? That's the point. So, questioning his grasp on reality, questioning his sanity 6 months ago, to today where everybody paying attention thinks that he's bonkers. What's changed? What do you point at? Well, actually, no, I'm afraid I'm making a presumption here. Do you agree that the President of the United States of America has lost his mind? I mean, you could, of course, quite rightly point out he didn't have much of a mind to begin with. But there was a sort of diabolical genius to his conduct in some ways. Now, it's just diabolical. Do you agree that the President of the United States has lost his mind? You can, of course, disagree with that. I might quite enjoy hearing from you. 0345 6060 973. And if you agree, if you think that he has lost his mind, what's your proof? What do you use as your whetstone to sharpen that conclusion? So there it is. Has he lost his mind? 0345 6060 973. And what's your evidence? Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's sort of why now question as well, isn't it? It's why now? What is it that's happened now? Because there are loads of things you can point at from 6 months ago, even 6 years ago, that speak to a depravity, a moral bankruptcy, a hideousness. I think the Jesus thing is really interesting because it's going to alienate traditional supporters. I mean, it's going to alienate Christians, albeit some of them are going to, are not really Christians worthy of the name if they support Donald Trump. It's very hard to see how you square the message of the Bible, particularly the New Testament, with the behaviour of Donald Trump. But hey, we are not here to examine that question. We're here to examine Trump's mental state. and wonder why in the last few days, people who might previously have been a little wary of reaching for words like deranged or for phrases like losing his mind. And Daniel Hannan not long ago was writing about how brilliant Donald Trump was going to be for Britain and indeed for Brexit. And now he's writing under the headline, Donald Trump is losing his mind. Matthew Parris in The Times and Alan Rusbridger in Prospect, all not just speculating but concluding that Donald Trump has gone, to coin a phrase, bonkers. He is too deranged to continue in office. Why now? Given that there's such a long history of disgusting behaviour and extraordinary conduct, what is it about the last week that has crystallised the thought in your mind that Trump has lost the plot? And do we know enough about American politics to conclude or to wonder what might happen next? It's a Simon Marks moment, really, isn't it? I think J.D. Vance would have to set the ball rolling, wouldn't he? He'd have to set the process in motion. But what is it that has made everybody come round, to be a bit self-referential for a moment, to what we've been saying for ages, that Donald Trump is bonkers? James is in Dundee. James, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
Love your show. First-time caller.
Welcome.
James, I'd go all the way back to when he started posting as the Obamas as animals and himself as an animal. The fact that was
the
unchecked.
Lion King, wasn't it?
Exactly. And obviously, bit questionable posting the Obamas as monkeys. That's highly inappropriate.
Well, I mean, obviously it is. Crikey, we don't want anyone to think I'm about to start arguing again. But if we accept, and I do, absolutely, 100% accept that Trump's appeal lies in his racism, his misogyny and his climate change denial, that's the sort of holy trinity of things that people really like, whatever they may be prepared to publicly admit to, then you're not going to alienate anybody. Yes. You're not going to alienate anybody by doing a racism. Are you?
No, James. But I think when we start questioning his sanity more recently, as you've mentioned, it's the timings he's posting, and the fact that the so-called leader of the free world has unvetted access to social media.
He's sitting up in bed posting schoolboy memes and swearing at the Iranian nation, threatening to destroy their civilization.
If those aren't alarm bells, then I don't know what are, James.
No, I agree. So it's almost as if it's everything that has gone before dialed up. The volume has been turned up and the attempts to excuse or explain it become ever harder to the point where they become pretty close to pointless. He has lost the plot now. He's looked like a man losing the plot for the longest time, but he now looks like a man who's lost the plot.
Yes. And James, please, I'm by no means an expert or a politician, but it seems like in his first term he was held far more to account, whereas now he's got a Marco Rubio, a J.D. Vance, a Pete Hegseth.
So this is chicken and egg. This is chicken and egg. I think you make a brilliant point, is that narcissism goes on untrammeled. And also he did win. This is an important point. What does that do to your ego? You've already got an overdeveloped ego or a weird ego, and then you win. And people start treating you like you're Jesus. Not just on social media, but in the flipping Oval Office, laying their hand. Maybe he started believing the hype around him and it's finally tipped him over the edge. It's like the last bit of the jigsaw is the sycophancy. How bizarre. Oh, that's the second big insight of the day. Peter Mandelson, the reason why he was a brilliant appointment is exactly the same reason why he was an appalling appointment. And the final straw on the camel's back of Donald Trump's fantasy is actually the sycophancy that he's surrounded himself with. That's what broke his brain. The final thing was the thing that he thought would protect him. I don't know. It's thinking out loud. Nice work, James. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Imagine, writes the world's wrongest man, Daniel Hannan, it was someone other than President Donald Trump. Suppose a different leader were posting deranged rants in the small hours, insulting the spiritual leader of 1.3 billion Catholics, threatening entire civilizations with annihilation, and comparing himself to God. What would be the reaction? That's not a rhetorical question. I want you to think about that as we head towards the headlines. If it was any other world leader posting deranged rants in the small hours in which he insults the Pope, the spiritual leader of 1.3 billion Catholics. He threatens entire civilizations with annihilation while swearing and conducting himself like a saloon bar drunk. and compares himself to God before lying about it, what would the reaction be? I don't even know where to begin pondering the question of what the world would do if Joe Biden had behaved like this. But you don't need to. 11:30 is the time. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, I wonder whether it rings any bells for you. Do you look at Donald Trump and recognise his conduct, whether it is a sort of narcissistic disorder running out of control, whether there is perhaps echoes of dementia kicking in, a combination of both? I don't know. I just wonder what has changed this week that has seen a sort of broadening consensus that the President of the United States of America has lost his mind. What would you point to? And it might not be immediately obvious. Here are some suggestions before we get back to the phones. Nathan writes, he's reached epic levels of ego and power. He's always been like this. Just look at the comments he's been making for decades. It's not madness, it's just him, which is arguably scarier. I disagree. I think something's happened in the last week. I think it could be what you identify, actually. There's something about the idea, if you're in a laboratory and you've got a test tube that contains absolute power. You know that phrase, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And he has created an environment of absolute power. I don't know how much you can stomach of the Oval Office or the public meetings where they all sit around telling him he's amazing. It's like something that you would associate with Caligula or a particularly toxic Roman emperor. You all sit around. They all sit around telling him that he's amazing, truly amazing. Not just like telling him, "Hey, you're pretty good. You're a pretty good president." But they say you are probably the finest human being that's ever lived. You should leave your body to medical science because you are physically extraordinary. I mean, they just pour this utter bilge into both of his ears all the time, and it has done something to him. Is it the sycophancy he created in order to insulate himself from criticism that has tipped him over the edge? Or is it something else? This is from Jim. The joke with the Japanese Prime Minister shows that he has lost all perspective and any comprehension of right and wrong. That was an extraordinary moment. But, yeah, maybe it was actually a sign that he'd just lost that. So he'd behave outrageously, but always within some parameters. God, he's so shocking. He's so shocking, but I love him. And then he does something, so, you're not going to get offended on the part of the Japanese people if you're a big Donald Trump fan. But then he went after the Pope and pretended he was Jesus. He's lost the parameters that used to marshal his madness, or his depravity at least, appear to have disappeared, don't they, in the last few days? Mark goes down the dementia route. I don't think he has lost his mind, James. This is the sign of dementia. Sundowning dementia is what we're watching. My wife is a nurse, and this is what she sees daily. This is what a deteriorating dementia patient sounds like, in which case, of course, we are bound to show more sympathy towards him during his decline than he has ever shown towards anybody, up to and including people who have died, after which, of course, he's announced himself delighted to see them go. Good morning, James, writes Lee. The evidence for the Mango Mussolini losing or having lost his mind has been building for a while. Don't forget the AI video he posted of himself defecating or dropping feces on the No Kings protesters. Again, this is the thing that I'm taking away so far. All of this is horrible behaviour, but you can see the base lapping it up. The racism, the misogyny, the climate change denial. It's always 1, 2 or 3 of those things that excuse every single thing he does. But this shows he's lost his ability to know where that line is. He's attacking the Pope. He's lost his ability to know where that line is. And what's that about? Is that sundowning dementia? I don't know enough to answer the question. Gay's in Bath. Gay, what do you think?
Well, I wish he'd read the book. If somebody's written it, How to Bluff Your Way as to Being a President, because if somebody has written it, he probably stopped after the first chapter where it says you can just be as bossy and shout at everybody.
But that's not mad. That's not lost mind. That's not derangement. We're looking at something different this week.
I think he's just plain evil now, and I don't know if you saw. My attention was drawn to one of his latest tweets or posts. Which was when he was playing Frank Sinatra and My Way.
No,
and you think, my God, so Hitler killed himself in the end.
Yeah,
and you think, regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. And is it an awareness he has of his decline that he only sees one way out, like Jonestown? You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you've leapt a bit. You've reached a bit there. I haven't seen the clip that you refer to, but the idea that his conduct in the last week has reached parts that previous conduct had not reached.
Well, also, he's almost getting a bit of a high on it because he's not been asleep at meetings. He's out there, isn't he?
Sitting up in the middle of the night, posting the weirdest things now on social media. Also lying through his teeth. I mean, in a way, he's always done that, but that's moved up a notch, claiming that the Pope thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's up there with accusing somebody criticising Donald Trump of somehow being a fan of the Ayatollah. It's a level of derangement that is almost impossible to believe unless you've actually heard it. You could find out the Pope's position on nuclear weapons in about 1 second flat. He doesn't think anyone should have them, but to claim that he thinks it's okay for Iran to have one is what happens, I suppose, if you're sitting up in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. The Pope is weak on crime. Well, he hasn't committed any, as far as I'm aware, unlike the president. And then you come to the fact that he went to watch an Ultimate Fighting Championship pay-per-view fight while his vice president was trying to negotiate an end to the Iran war, along with his golfing buddy Steve Witkoff and his witless son-in-law Jared Kushner. I guess the thing I'm worrying about now, or the thing I'm wondering now, thank you, Gay, is are we watching a culmination or a collapse? Is it simply that all of the guardrails have now been removed? There's nobody there who can even say to him, I don't think you should go to the Ultimate Fighting Championship pay-per-view while JD is in Pakistan trying to negotiate peace with the Iranians. I just don't think you should go. There's nobody in the room who can even do that now. There's nobody, I mean, literally, if he had his flies undone, no one would tell him. He's in that kind of space. So is it a culmination or a collapse that we're seeing? Has he always been like this? But the guardrails of his own consciousness and people around him putting limits on what he can and can't do have been completely removed. So we are seeing an inevitable consequence of the ecosystem he's created, an ecosystem of denial, dishonesty, flattery and sycophancy. There you go, there's your question. Only took me 40 minutes to get there. Collapse or culmination? Geraint is in Chester. Geraint, what do you reckon?
Probably culmination. I mean, he's in his 80s now, so he's getting on a bit, and he's always been like this, like when he used to boast that he could shoot someone and people would still vote for him.
Yeah, but that was true. That wasn't mad. That was actually, that's why I used the phrase diabolical genius. And also, Mick Jagger is in his 80s. So it's not just simply by dint of being in your 80s, you don't become all the things that Donald Trump is becoming or has become. Something has changed in the last week, and I'm trying to pin down what it is.
I think in relation to the actual people that you've quoted, or the journalists you've quoted, is that, to be frank, I'm going to be cynical here and say that because he was trying to mock or trying to be funny clever with the Pope, well, his base is very Christian, hardcore Christian.
Yes.
And so they've realised which way the wind is blowing with their audience. And so that's why they're now coming out with all this, because, I mean, it was the same over here with guys like Farage with the Iran war, where he was like pro-war, then he realised that his base were like, no, we're not pro-Iran war, so suddenly he's like flip-flopping. In the case of Farage, you're definitely right. And if and I use the word very loosely, but if a journalist like Richard Littlejohn were to suddenly start questioning Donald Trump's sanity in a newspaper column, it absolutely would be out of cowardice, querulousness, dishonesty and cowardice. But these three, I chose them quite carefully. I mean, Hanan is mad,
but even a stop clock is right twice a day. He's not doing this because he's worried about repercussions. And Rusbridger and Matthew Parris are two of the most reliable thinkers in the British media. They do not toe lines, because they manage to upset different bunches of people depending on what they're writing about. So that's why I was struck by, I mean, your observation holds true for an awful lot of people who do what they do for a living, but not actually for these three. That's why I found it so interesting. That's why I found the juxtaposition so interesting, that they all arrived at the same conclusion at more or less the same time, because it speaks not to calculations on their part, but to observations. Something in the last week has changed, and it's best expressed through events. The attack upon the Pope, the comparison of himself to Jesus, and the extraordinary posts praising Allah while threatening to destroy the Iranian civilization. Something snapped. I want to know what it is, and I want to know whether it's a culmination or a collapse. Thank you, Garen. Andre's in Cambridge. Andre, what do you reckon?
Right, I wanted to present you with a new theory, something that I've had as a theory for a while. So my theory is that Trump's not mad at all.
Right.
I think that, could you imagine a theoretical scenario, where he brought the guys from Cambridge Analytica that helped him in his first campaign into the CIA, and then he gave them all the resources of Anthropic, etc., and he's actually using their tactics to grow his base. But
he's hemorrhaging support at the moment. He's not growing his base.
It certainly appears like that, because he's getting desperate and he's making a few mistakes. But I still think that there's some tactics.
This is an analysis of the last week. It's not an analysis of the bigger picture or the theory that you think underpins it all. In the last week, something has snapped.
Yeah, something has snapped. I think that perhaps he's taken advice and it hasn't worked out, and he's getting a bit desperate for sure.
He's not taking advice from anyone. That's the point.
It looks like his administration around him, but I'm sure there's other forces behind this. That he's game. I mean, he's crazy. There's no two ways about it. But I think there's more to it than appear. Than what we can see.
I mean, I think you're still where I was a few months ago, and thinking that there must be more to this than meets the eye. I had the same problem with Dominic Cummings. He can't be as awful as he seems to be. There must be some conversations going on behind closed doors that mitigate the apparent awfulness of this man. And then the Barnard Castle thing happened, and you realise, no, he is just awful. He's just awful. And the same with Donald Trump. I don't think he's a puppet anymore. I mean, there's the Project 2025 stuff, of course, and the attempts to portray Britain in particular and Europe in general as basket cases where there's no freedom of speech and everyone's been locked up in their own homes because they're terrified of Muslims, or whatever the lies are this week. I get all of that, and I understand the basis for it in terms of propaganda and whipping up the base, terrorising your own base into acquiescence. But this week is different. I mean, if you had a truth serum or a lie detector, and you asked him where he thinks he sits in relation to Jesus, what do you think he'd say without the alarm going off? Do you think you are as important as Jesus? Do you think, do you think you are? What do you think he'd say? That is not sane. John Lennon was joking when he said that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, and that was an international story of incredible proportions, and he was a singer. He was a singer-songwriter. He was a Beatle. And he compared himself to Jesus, or claimed he was bigger than Jesus, and the world went absolutely mad. The President of the United States of America did it. I don't think there's anybody giving him advice. But I wonder whether or not you hear any bells ringing in the back of your brain that this is something that you have seen on a smaller scale, much, much closer to home. In which case, you know the number. 11:46 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's the first time I've thought that it may prompt some sort of intervention, but there's nobody around him who seems likely or minded to lead it. I think it was the Washington Post that reported this weekend on efforts to keep him out of the room when they were discussing the rescue of that downed US airman because of his, to put it politely, because he's so erratic and unreliable. But the military top brass wanted to keep him out of the room where they were discussing it. And in order to show him that the war is going well, they just show him pictures of things blowing up. It's as if they're managing him in one way, but not in another. It's as if you have a toddler who is actually in charge. Do you see what I mean? So if you've got a toddler that is prone to tantrums, then appeasement or mollifying or letting him live on Spangles or Haribo or whatever it may be means you have an easier life. But the toddler is actually in charge. It's not just the question of keeping the tantrums to a minimum. The toddler is in charge. The toddler can fire you. The toddler can appoint the Secretary of State for War. So you can manage the tantrum up to a point. You can manage the personality defects up to a point. You can think that bending the knee, sycophancy, giving him presents. It's a toddler, isn't it? But with the big difference that you're not just trying to avoid tantrums. That's the only bit you can control. Let's give him some presents. Let's give him a peace prize. Let's compare him to Jesus. Let's just keep him sweet because we're worried about what he will do when he's not sweet. But you know he's not going to be sweet all the time. And that's why the worst stuff now is happening in the middle of the night. It's happening in the middle of the night because there's nobody there giving him presents. So he's sitting all on his own because Melania doesn't go anywhere near him. And frankly, who can blame her? But he's sitting all on his own in the middle of the night with his phone. Doesn't have the look of a man who's getting much REM sleep. And there's nobody in his bedroom saying, oh, have another prize. Or, oh, you're the best. So you keep him sweet as long as you keep him amped up on Haribo. And Haribo takes many forms. It can be the FIFA Peace Prize. It could be the agreeing with his lies about stopping wars or being incredible, being a very stable genius. You're the best, you're the greatest. And he posts that, of course, when he needs even more adulation and vindication. He'll post, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, everybody says so. And no one can be bothered really to disagree with him. I doubt he reads replies. And then he surrounds himself with people who keep telling him he's incredible, he's amazing, you're the best, Hercules. But in the middle of the night, anybody else get a little bit of Billy Joel there at that point in the middle of the night when he's all on his own and there's nobody there giving him a biscuit or telling him he's great or inventing a peace prize or giving him some baubles or a medal or a present or a big kind of plaudit. That's when the truth emerges. That's when the real him comes. That's when the stuff they're trying to keep under wraps comes kicking and screaming to the surface. And he attacks the Pope, and he compares himself to Jesus, and he accuses and he threatens to destroy the entire civilization of Iran. That's it, isn't it? That's the middle of the night. So, is it a collapse or a culmination? Felicity's in Sidmouth. Felicity, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I'd like to say that, whether he's mad or not, I think he is personally, but I can't prove that. But it's the fact that he's cornered now. I mean, everything he said that he would do, like in and out, quick war, get the oil back, the economy would be great. Everything's going the opposite direction, and people are really starting to feel it. And even he can't be hidden from that anymore.
You think? Because I mean, he's been getting away with that forever. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, we'll fix it in 2 weeks. And then, 10 weeks later, nothing's happened. We've won this, we've won that, the strait is up. And his entire presidency, his entire life has been typified by deceit and distraction. Why is it different now? Because the war is on a whole different level.
Yes, because he always believed, he was probably told by the people around him, because they're all sycophants, that it would be a quick one and they would win and Iran would buckle. And of course that's not happened.
I don't think he was, actually. I think he was told about the Strait of Hormuz, but he just thought he'd be able to style it out.
Yeah, because he had a few friends around him.
There's a Gary Larson cartoon. Do you know The Far Side? Do you know those cartoons, The Far Side?
I think so. Go ahead.
There's one from 40 years ago that cites the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, there were difficulties in the Strait of Hormuz 40 years ago, but there's a Gary Larson cartoon that says the Love Boat had accidentally made its way into the Strait of Hormuz. So everybody knew that this would be in the arsenal of the Iranian regime, except he just thought that it would all be done and dusted in the same way that Venezuela was. And there's nobody in the room to tell him not true.
Exactly, because he believes in the American might, and that they've got the best planes, they've got more money, and they think he thought that was enough alone, and of course it's not.
We're getting chicken and egg, aren't we here? We don't know whether something particular has happened that explains the latest aberrations, or whether it is almost a step-by-step process by which the worst thing you can do if you're Donald Trump is surround yourself with sycophants, because it will tip you over the edge. And that is why the worst stuff is happening when he's in bed on his own and the sycophants aren't there to keep him under control. Kudos to David, who may have been the only person to spot my Nutty Professor reference a moment ago. Hercules. Did James just quote the Nutty Professor when discussing the president? Indeed he did, David, and as you say, that makes sense, actually. And on a more serious note, this from S, we need a discussion on dementia, James. My dad used to hand-deliver political leaflets in his 80s and believed he would become Prime Minister. Trump is now a medical discussion. But why? Why now and not 5 years ago when he was telling us to drink bleach or that light could cure COVID? Do you see what I mean? There's something's changed. I'm not quite sure what it is. Felicity, thank you. Tom's in Glasgow. Tom, what would you like to say?
James, well, I've wanted to have a chat with you for a while on various different topics, but it was Donald Trump that finally pushed me over the edge.
Good man. You and me both.
So there's a few different things. I hope I can keep my train of thought for these. I think, first of all, the whole topic of discussing whether or not Donald Trump is mad is a fun thought experiment to do, but we don't have the clinical information, and we're not going to have it to be able to actually say if he is mad or not. I think the conversation and the comments from certain people talking about signs of dementia is something that's interesting to look into. But I think my view would tend towards being that this is a culmination.
Yeah.
And I also think as well, in a way, the question of his mental health and the fact that he essentially blocks anybody from getting information about the state of his health, or he gets some shonky health report done.
I love that
says,
word.
Yes. his health is unbelievably amazing.
But,
I think you can fit all of that in a way to everything else to do with misconduct, whether it's taxes, whether it's finances in general, whether it's hiding or destroying information, whether it's sexual misconduct. He will always do, it seems, whatever he can to block that information getting out. That doesn't prove that he has mental health problems, but it fits within this pattern of behavior that he's constantly trying to block everything from getting out. And so, I actually, in line with what one of your recent callers said, and I've been thinking this for a while, I feel more confident in saying that I think that Donald Trump is evil than I do in saying that he's mad.
Yeah, I see. I just said that 6 months ago, but it feels to me like something shifted in the last week.
Well, I think the level of pressure has ramped up. But again, I go back to what I said at the start. I don't think we are qualified to be able to
of course we're not. No, but we are. We are, but we're not. We are perfectly entitled to say he has lost his mind. And that's why I said, what would you point at as proof of it? And I think even if you were to credit him with having some sort of diabolical genius, which I have done, but not everybody agrees with.
I would never have taken that point.
1.3 billion Catholics who were kind of all on the hook for his latest attack against the Pope, a key part of his base in the United States of America. It's more than a figure of speech when you're looking at someone like Donald Trump attacking the Pope to say he has clearly lost his marbles. Something quite significant has clearly happened. But what we've done this hour, and with your help, Tom, is take it back to the favourite analogy probably of this programme over the years, and we're kind of back to the boiled frog. So it may well be that we've seen incremental increases in both conduct and impunity, and that a threshold has been reached this week, which has led these two august commentators and one hat stand all to conclude within hours of each other that in the case of the hat stand, Daniel Hannan, Donald Trump is losing his mind. In the case of Alan Rusbridger, at the Prospect magazine, I was already worried about Trump's mental decline. It just got worse. And, of course, in the case of Matthew Parris as well.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's a lovely piece in one newspaper today, in The Guardian, that details how members of the Finchley Reform Synagogue, which you will remember was the target of an attempted firebombing a few days ago, stepped in to help members of the Somali Bravanese community when their centre was destroyed by arson 13 years ago. That's a Muslim congregation, and members of the Finchley Reform Synagogue realised that their Muslim neighbours would be without anywhere to pray as Ramadan approached, so they offered them the use of the synagogue for evening prayers for the duration of the holy month. And the arrangement stayed in place for 4 years until their new centre was ready. And they were celebrating together this weekend at the Shabbat service on Friday evening. There's a wonderful quote from Psalms painted high on the wall inside the synagogue. How good and how wonderful it is when friends sit together. And isn't that at odds with the feeling surrounding so many issues in the Middle East and beyond at the moment? That idea that a Muslim community, Somalis, many of whom were, and of course still are, refugees, could be welcomed into anywhere in this country. But the idea of the Finchley Reform Synagogue throwing open its doors for its Muslim neighbours just feels like a lesson, doesn't it? It feels like something that we should be learning from, all of us. The problem, of course, is that story, beautiful though it is, sits below on the page of the newspaper that I'm looking at now, another story, which is anything but lovely. It is the Chief Rabbi's response to a number of incidents like the one at the Finchley Reform Synagogue, which speak of sustained attacks on Jews in this country. The Chief Rabbi describes it as a sustained campaign of violence and intimidation. The Kenton United Synagogue in northwest London being the latest to come under attack. And as you heard in the news bulletin, arrests have been made, which limits some of what we can and can't say. But you probably also heard, or you may have heard, one of the deputy commissioners of the Metropolitan Police on with Nick Ferrari this morning, suggesting that people are being sort of not even groomed online. They're kind of being bribed with relatively pitiful sums of money. And this traces back to organisations allied with the Iranian regime to go and attack synagogues in this country. And I couldn't work out why I approached these stories with a weird bubble in my tummy. I couldn't work out what it was that was troubling me. And then I did. I hate these stories. I hate these events. I hate these incidents of anti-Semitism with a passion that is identical to the feelings that I get with any racist attacks, any far-right rhetoric, any attack upon members of our community, whether it's a Nigel Farage fan saying that we should be setting fire to hotels full of refugees, or whether it's these apparently semi-state-sponsored hoodlums trying to set fire to synagogues in my town, in London. But what is missing from a lot of the conversation is the fact that hideous phrase anti-Semitism is 110% accurate in this case, but it doesn't apply to an awful lot of people to whom it has been, or at whom it has been hurled in recent months and years. And I think that this might be part of the problem, because it occurred to me as I also got some fan mail this morning, genuinely. Dear James, enjoy your show Monday to Friday on LBC. Runs to 4 pages, and on the 4th page, we enjoy your show except the pro-Israel bias. Much room for improvement on this subject. And then you kindly detail some ways in which you think I could do a better job. And I mention that only because since the hideous terror attacks of October, the Hamas terror attacks of October the 7th, I've come in to begin with for relatively equal accusations of being biased against one side or the other. That's why I love the story of the Finchley Reform Synagogue opening its doors and its hearts to the Somali Bravanese community from just up the road so much, because that's what makes my heart sing. But here's a problem that I've got, okay? I don't think it would be controversial to suggest that a lot of the ill will and anti-Semitism that is bubbling up to the surface in this country at the moment is linked to events in the Middle East. If you're looking for reasons why the volume is being turned up on this ancient hatred, it is going to have a lot to do with Gaza and the genocide there undertaken by Benjamin Netanyahu's regime. So I sit here today as somebody who is repulsed. That's not even a strong enough word. Somebody who is utterly heartbroken and disgusted by what Benjamin Netanyahu has done in Gaza. Utterly disgusted by it. And utterly disgusted by anti-Semitism of any kind, particularly, obviously, when it veers into physical violence. We have, people dead in Manchester as a direct consequence of an anti-Semitic attack. The conflation of every Jew in this country with the current Israeli regime is problematic on a million different levels. But I think some people struggle to accept even that a Jew in this country who supports what Benjamin Netanyahu has done in Gaza and is currently doing in Lebanon has as much right to peace and safety as anybody else does. The conflation is never valid. A lot of people struggle with this. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of people struggle with it is because we've been silenced. The idea that somebody who is disgusted by anti-Semitism and disgusted by genocide in Gaza is utterly unrepresented in all of the conversation. And I think, and you might be about to prove me wrong on this, I think that we are probably the biggest constituency. I think there are probably more people in this country disgusted by genocide and disgusted by anti-Semitism than there are people comfortable with genocide or comfortable with anti-Semitism. I honestly do. And I don't completely understand why those voices are largely absent from these conversations. I despise anti-Semitism. I despise genocide. And I don't see any difficulty in keeping the two both present and separate. So how do we do that? I mean, do you feel, and I'll have a look at my inbox in a minute and we'll see what the order of the day is, but do you feel that the conversation is weird in the way that I do? That you can't really find any obvious places in which those two twin positions are sustainable? I am repulsed by anti-Semitism. I am accused of anti-Semitism for condemning genocide in Gaza and condemning the Israeli regime. I have been pretty much since it became clear that Netanyahu's response to the terror attacks was going to be hideously disproportionate. And that is the price I pay for the amazing job that I've got. But equally, I know anti-Semitism when I see it. And setting fire to synagogues or attacking people simply for being Jewish or spitting at people because they're wearing a Star of David is hideous. But I don't know how to make this voice louder. I know how to make my voice louder. You just turn the volume up on your radio or your smart speaker. But I don't know how helpful it is to anybody to have created this silo where anybody speaking out against Israel is accused of being anti-Semitic, because it means that when real anti-Semitism happens, as is happening now on a scale which isn't unprecedented, tragically, but is definitely growing, it's as if some people don't know quite what to do. I know anti-Semitism when I see it, and I know dangerous false accusations when I see them. How do we square this circle? Am I talking about you? 0345 6060 973. And the thing is, you could be Jewish, you could be Catholic, you could be agnostic, you could be atheist. If you're Jewish, you're going to feel more strongly about anti-Semitism because you are a potential target of it, but you're not necessarily going to feel more or less strongly about genocide. You're no more responsible for it than I am. Even if Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly claims that he is acting for the Jewish people and he cites biblical justification for some of the things that he does, that's just one man. That's just one man indulging in propaganda. Doesn't make you responsible for what's gone on there or what's gone on in Lebanon. And yet I presume that the targeting of Jewish-linked premises is in part a consequence of Israeli activities in the Middle East, Israeli genocide in Gaza, Israeli incursions at the moment in Lebanon. I don't know if you saw the story from Lebanon this weekend of an IDF soldier attacking a crucifix, smashing Jesus' head with a sledgehammer while in uniform. It's been confirmed by the IDF that that's true. The kind of comparisons Kemi Badenoch was making on Nick's show this morning are so boneheaded and unhelpful. So, well, what if it was this and what if it was that? But, I mean, that got me as a Catholic, as a Christian, as somebody who has had a crucifix in every classroom I've ever sat in and most buildings. The idea of an IDF soldier taking a sledgehammer to Jesus' head in the middle of the raising of a Christian Lebanese village it's absolutely hideous. But I don't hold anybody else responsible for that. I don't hold a Jewish mate or a Jewish colleague responsible for the attack upon that crucifix. Why would you hold all Jews responsible for the actions of the Israeli government, even if, perhaps especially if, the Israeli government claims that it is acting for all Jews? So there's an element of the conversation that I don't think is had often enough. How much of this is exacerbated by the rhetoric of extremism coming out of Benjamin Netanyahu and some of his closest colleagues? I've read some fascinating insights into how anti-Semitism is rising and the Israeli government is not helping. But the only people ultimately responsible for acts of anti-Semitism are the anti-Semites. So why are the voices of those who find the actions of the Israeli regime abhorrent and the actions of anti-Semites in our own country abhorrent, why are they so absent from this conversation? You can have a crack at answering that if you want. Why are they so? I mean, in many ways, I'm talking about myself. You know how my mind works. If I feel somehow bullied into not talking about something, then I am going to talk about it, regardless of what the subject matter may be. But I just felt a bubble in my belly when I looked at that juxtaposition of stories here today. UK's chief rabbi warns of sustained attack on Jews after spate of anti-Semitic incidents. And then quiet allyship, people of two faiths united in solidarity, the Finchley Reform Synagogue, throwing open its doors for its Muslim neighbours. And I just felt a bubble in my tummy about, hang on a minute, I'm one of those people who is repulsed by anti-Semitism and repulsed by Benjamin Netanyahu's regime and activities in Gaza. I suppose question number one is, am I right? Is it almost impossible in public in Britain to be simultaneously disgusted by anti-Semitism and disgusted by genocide? 0345 6060 973. I'm not going mad, am I? You are describing me, writes Lauren. The media has done that silencing, in my opinion. I don't know. But it does feel to me to be odd, at the very least, that you're not allowed to be sincerely disgusted by both. By anti-Semitism, particularly on our own streets, and by genocide in Gaza and the continuing abominations being visited upon Lebanese people. So question number one, am I right? 0345 6060 973. And how has this happened? Why is that the case? Why is it almost impossible? I've heard discussions about the spate of anti-Semitic attacks conducted without any mention of the Middle East. I've heard discussions about the latest round conducted without any mention of the Middle East. If you're going after a criminal, one of the first things you need if you're seeking a prosecution is motive, right? Means, opportunity and motive. How can you have a conversation about a crime without contemplating motive? If you think I'm wrong, 0345 6060 973, if you think that the increasing temperature of anti-Semitism has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in the Middle East, then I want to take your call. But goodness me, it's odd, isn't it, that you're not allowed to find both disgusting? The actions of the Israeli government and the actions of anti-Semites on our streets in our city. How has this happened? And I think the question I really want your help with is, can we fix it? Can we fix it? Why is it so hard for some people to understand that that bloke over there, that synagogue round the corner, is not responsible for or answerable for the actions of the political leadership in Israel at the moment? Am I right? How did it happen? Can we fix it? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 12. I think I can answer the first question. It's definitely not just me. Perhaps you think I'm wrong to feel the way that I feel, that it has somehow become almost impossible publicly in this country to abhor both anti-Semitism and the conduct of the current Israeli government. But why is a question you can help answer. And what we can do about it is a question we probably need to start answering together. I don't want to live in a country where places of worship are attacked. I don't want to live in a country where the Shadow Justice Secretary can call for public prayers to be outlawed for one religion, as Nick Timothy did with Muslims not long ago. Something Kemi Badenoch seemed to have forgotten when she was doing the interview rounds earlier this morning. You're calling for one religion to be forbidden. If you want to play that silly game, well, imagine if Nick Timothy had called for Jews to be banned from praying in public in this country because it's a, quotes, Christian, end quotes, country. Would he be getting the same reaction as he got? Would he get defended by his party leader? It's mad. That's why I love this story. I might share it with you on Blue Sky. How good and how wonderful it is when friends sit together. Painted high on the wall in the Finchley Reform Synagogue. And as the congregation gathered for Shabbat service on Friday evening, it felt like an especially apt sentiment, writes Esther Adley, and one of the loveliest things I've read in a very long time. 3 days after the synagogue was the target of an attempted firebombing, hundreds of members came together in solidarity, joined by guests including one special group of neighbours. Members of the Somali Bravanese community, many of whom arrived in the area as refugees and whose own centre was destroyed by arson 13 years ago. On that occasion, realising their Muslim neighbours would be without anywhere to pray as Ramadan approached, Finchley Reform Synagogue offered them use of the synagogue for evening prayers for the duration of the holy month. The arrangement lasted for 4 years. Tom's in Barnet. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, this is a big one.
You can say that again.
Yeah, I'm doubly nervous. A, because I'm talking to you again for a long time, and B, because, this is such a big subject. It's a big subject in our house.
Okay.
Because I'm not Jewish myself, but my wife is, and my children are.
Yes.
And this conversation this morning made me think about a Facebook post that I did about, I can't remember, just after the attacks in Manchester, and I was saying the same thing. Like, I'm horrified by what happened in Israel on October the 7th and the response by Netanyahu in Gaza. And then I was horrified by what happened in Manchester, and then these attacks now. These anti-Semitic attacks are on the rise now, and I'm nervous. My wife is really nervous. So I just.
Do you recognise what I described? The difficulty, the near impossibility of simultaneously condemning what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza and abhorring anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks, especially in this country. It's a voice that I very rarely hear.
That's the thing, and that was the second thing I was saying in that post was exactly the same thing. And it's terrible that I should feel nervous to even say it, because I was worried about what the comeback was going to be. And I was lucky that everyone, all our friends said, yeah, I hear you, I hear where you're coming from. I didn't get any sort of comeback from some of the other people that I'm aware of who are posting much more troubling things.
But even if you had friends or family members from who were supportive of what Netanyahu has done in Gaza, it wouldn't or shouldn't involve any targets being painted on their backs in this country or anywhere else.
No, exactly. I think the one thing that I would maybe disagree with you with is that, and it's something that Kate, my wife, and I were talking about just yesterday, is that I think it's an excuse. I think that there are anti-Semitic people who walk among us, and the situation which is happening in Gaza and what Netanyahu is doing, I think it sometimes gives these people a reason to attack people physically or verbally, and just voiced those opinions that they've always had.
Oh, I don't think we're disagreeing. I think that's indubitable. It's why I use the phrase "ancient hatred" in my introduction. But to be fair, mate, my introductions go on so long. You could be forgiven for missing a moment or two. And of course, they exist. But equally, there are people who have been, quotes, radicalised, end quotes, by their horror at what has happened since October the 7th, what has been done to the Palestinian people since October the 7th. And I don't know how you separate the two. I suppose you just look at their track record, don't you, and find out whether or not these seeds started sprouting relatively recently or whether they've been there for years or for decades. Why do you think it's happened? Why do you think you felt the way that you felt, that it would be so difficult to simultaneously, for obvious reasons in your case, given that it would be directed at your children, to be repulsed by anti-Semitism and to be profoundly disapproving or disgusted by the actions of the Israeli regime, government?
I think I'm going to go back to one of your other phrases. I think it's footballification.
Do you really?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be, though, should it?
It shouldn't, but it's still happening. Like, you can see it in every other conversation that you have. A friend of mine who lives up in Scotland, we have similar views on most things, but every now and again, he'll ask me, well, what's your view on trans, or what's your view on whatever? And, and then I'm just like, well, what you want me to say? Do you want me to pick a side and start shouting, or do you want me to, go down the middle, which is where I try to do with most things? So I think he reads a lot of the tabloids. I mean, he says he thinks about stuff. I don't know. But it's just...
You're not allowed nuance. You're not allowed...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for what you're going through. And of course, I'm very, very sorry for what your wife and children are going through as well, which is a culture, a climate of fear.
Well, I mean, in these situations, she talks actively about moving back to Israel. And, and she and I've never been there, so I don't know what it's like. But, like, even on that, the prospect of that, we disagree, because it shows a lot that she would consider moving back to Israel under threat of rocket fire and spending time in shelters over staying here, where the environment seems to be moving entirely in the wrong direction. And she's talking about parallels with 1930s Germany and all that kind of stuff, and that's a massive thing if she's considering that.
It is. And yet it makes sense, doesn't it? It's kind of inevitable in the circumstances. Thank you, Tom. Here's my first accusation of anti-Semitism from Joel. So far, the only one. And it's such a tired trope, Joel. How many hours have you done on the much deadlier war in Sudan as opposed to Gaza? Oh, yeah, not one. There's your anti-Semitism right there. You're just going to have to run me through the Sudanese dimension to British society and the British government's role as an ally of the architects of genocide in Sudan, Joel. You're just going to have to run me through why you don't talk more about the situation in Sudan than you do about the situation in, for example, Israel. You're just going to have to run me through what it is that the British government does to support the people responsible for war in Sudan, as opposed to the British government's role or our country's role in Middle Eastern events and Middle Eastern history. Listen, it's absolutely fine to be thick or to be ignorant. That's something that we're all guilty of on occasion. But to move from your own ignorance to accusing me of anti-Semitism for condemning the genocide in Gaza more often than I condemn the genocide in Sudan, that's part of the problem, Joel. That's what word do you use? If I'm anti-Semitic for condemning genocide, what word do you use for people firebombing synagogues? Because you're going to have to come up with a stronger one, aren't you? It can't be the same thing that you're describing. But here you are. Matt Hewitt has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:32 is the time. This from Mark in Manchester. James, you make such a valid point about accusations of anti-Semitism when criticising Israel. I want to cry, scream and pull my hair out when spokespeople for Israel, after some terrible event either in Gaza by Israel or in the UK against Jews, aggressively shut down conversation by just shouting anti-Semitism over and over again. We are never going to find peace for Jews, Israelis, Muslims, Palestinians and anyone else if we cannot talk to each other. Thank you for your bravery. Talk about it. I don't know that it's bravery, Mark. It's a combination of confusion, perhaps, and probably a degree of stubbornness. Sarah takes up the theme. Thank you so much, James. I've been feeling this, and it's left me confused. I'm feeling alone. There's no representation of us who feel that both parties are acting in an abhorrent fashion. It's scary to speak out about this situation. I suppose it is, and that, I guess, is why Mark uses the word bravery. It is scary to speak out about this situation, which in itself is a terrifying truth, as we should be able to speak. It's interesting, isn't it? Both of those messages picking up on a similar theme of the conversation somehow being curtailed or censored, or people feeling that they're not allowed to express horror at anti-Semitism and horror at Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Judith writes, I totally agree with you. I've been on a few of the marches for Palestine and was so pleased to see Jewish people supporting the cause. I feel as much for them as I do for the people of Palestine and Lebanon, all suffering at the hands of the Israeli leaders. That needs to be pointed out more often. If there were a clearer definition of anti-Semitism, it would be easier to express abhorrence of actions as opposed to a religion. I don't know. Maybe. It's not a thought I've had before. Lots of messages like that coming in. I'm looking for some different perspectives, but apart from old Joel there accusing me of anti-Semitism because we're talking about attacks on synagogues as opposed to something to do with Sudan, I don't actually have any at the moment. Afternoon, James, writes Margaret. Like you, I'm appalled by the Israeli genocide in Gaza and by anti-Semitism, and I am vocal in my criticism of both. But a lot of people don't speak out about the former from fear of being accused of the latter. That's definitely true. Stephen's in Shrewsbury. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks. I'm a Jew. I don't practice the faith. I haven't done for a long time. I've got family in Israel.
Yeah.
But I think it was probably around the time of the Lebanon War, 79. And some of us, I was probably in my late teens then, was starting to say, hang on a minute, this is not where we want the country to be going.
Yeah.
So we started to criticise the Israeli government, and our friends would look at us and say, you can't do that. So fast forward to now, via a lot of wars, and we're in a situation where I don't talk to many of my old Jewish friends. They haven't really fallen out. I think they just were going on a different path.
Okay.
And actually, recently, I think what's been happening, because the way that the Israeli government directed the war against the Palestinians has started to make even those people wonder about whether the Israeli government can be separated from your identity as a Jew and therefore can be criticised. But I think one of the big problems is that that's culturally embedded.
Yes.
And it's really, really hard. You know, I've got family who are practicing the faith, and I would find it difficult to talk to them without it ending in, cold silence.
Because you see, that's the strange thing, isn't it, for non-Jews, is that I can understand it, but I'm never going to feel it. The idea that I will support everything that is done by any government of Israel if it is done in the name of our security, because of the shadow of the Holocaust still being so long and so dark, and Israel being the place where you go when it starts happening again. So it's a part of your identity not to criticise.
When I was 16, we went out in an organised trip, and I think it must have been around the time that one of the popes was doing his world tour, and he used to get on the ground at wherever he landed and kiss the ground in a very sort of demonstrative thing. So me and my mate did that when we got to Tel Aviv airport, and we were overwhelmed with joy. And then over the next few years, it became a horror show. I've got family living out there. I lived out there for a while. I protested against the government with Israeli Jews.
Yes.
And everybody had a reason why we were wrong. But there are people in Israel who are Jews working with Palestinians every day. My nephew is one of them. And they don't get on the news.
We've tried on this programme. We've had a few on this programme, but
it's
when you're having
important to recognise that good work.
The self-appointed spokespeople and the official spokespeople are always speaking from a position of supporting Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and whether they do it explicitly or implicitly, imputing anti-Semitism on the part of anybody that criticises it.
No, absolutely. But the truth is, everybody hates Netanyahu in Israel. They support him because they're trying to get whatever it is they're trying to get. And remember, in Israel, the government is proportional representation, and it's a very weird one because the Arabs don't get a proportional vote as such. But it means that the right-wing little parties, they can club together and then hold sway. And then add to the mix the American military-industrial complex and all the money, and you've just got a recipe for disaster. We should look at that and worry about what's happening here and the cultural identity of the flag and all that stuff, because we need to not forget that there are people working across the tracks holding their hands out. You know, it's like
I do know
about people coming together and sharing.
And yet it doesn't fit the footballification narrative, does it? It's as if you have to pick a side, as you've discovered with the friends from whom you've drifted apart over the years. You're not allowed to find common ground or fellow feeling. Thank you, Stephen. I can sense the suffering that you've gone through over the years as you've wrestled with this stuff, and you've clearly been wrestling with it for decades. Well, we've only really turned our attention to this specific element of the conversation today. I don't know, how helpful was it when there was a letter, wasn't there, published in the Financial Times by members of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and then they got suspended for expressing misgivings about the war in Gaza. I don't know what happened to that story. I think they were planning to appeal at one point, but the letter was published in the Financial Times. And resulted in the people who signed the letter being suspended, what they described as the enhanced punishment of effective expulsion from the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And I guess that adds to the idea that no one's allowed to speak out, especially Jewish people like you, Stephen. Chris is in Byfleet. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I wanted to just pinpoint down a little further that I think it is a very extreme form of footballification.
I wish I'd never invented that bloody word.
I know. It's
Chris?
A difficult one.
Yes.
The challenge is, I think there's so many multifacets here that where you pick a point, people often tend to stick with the kind of where history began for them position. For some, they may think October the 7th.
Yeah.
They may think the 1946 war. They might think the end of the Ottoman Empire. They may think, British mandates, colonialism. And every side, you might pick a principal position. There is a tragic victim on the other side. Both sides have been historically tragically mistreated, both in their region and externally. I understand exactly why people see, Jewish people will see a draw to Israel and a feeling of protection there because it's a state that they feel is geared around their protection and flourishment.
But it is. It's not just that they feel it. I mean, that is.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Unfortunately, that has led, to a very their reactions. I remember taking my daughter to the Palestine March a year or so ago. At the time she was 9. And she was asking to explain the situation, and I felt very, very torn. It says, okay, here's the situation. It's very challenging. There are victims on both sides. What we're discussing here, the problem right now is one side is significantly more military strong and will react to provocation and harm with an extreme physical force because they have been bullied historically and currently for so long in such terrible ways.
Yes.
They may react in a very disproportionately aggressive way. And so you have one side essentially throwing rocks and the other side coming back and throwing a grenade at them.
Yes, I know you know this, but just for the benefit of avoidance of any doubt, the events of October the 7th were a lot more than throwing rocks.
No, it was an absolute crime against humanity, frankly. And then the sides who obviously will defend that will say, well, look at how victimised the perpetrators were. And you can say, yes, I see that, but at the same time, that doesn't justify inhuman treatment. And nor does that justify the inhuman counteract.
Why do you think it is? I mean, footballification is... that's why I say I wish I'd never invented the word, because it covers a lot of ground without necessarily providing any detail. Why does everybody who's contributed to the programme so far, apart from Joel accusing me of anti-Semitism, why does everybody feel that it is really difficult to simultaneously condemn anti-Semitism and condemn the Israeli activities in Gaza? Why do you think it is?
I think because each side again have such a painful and visceral feeling of harm that it comes across as you're minimising their suffering, and they will have a very understandably passionate pushback.
That's very So your authenticity involves trying really hard to see both positions, even as you disagree with both of them.
Yes, and it's a challenge. Obviously, there's such an easy thing for, unfortunately, people say, for example, utilising anti-Semitic tropes to frame and justify why, for example, Israel is uniquely evil, rather than actually it's a tragedy of history, frankly, that we are in the situation that we're in. And my daughter and I, she kind of came away with, well, I'm at team people should be safe. And I said, yes, I would like to see everyone safe. The challenge is there is currently no solution that fits either side.
And that's part of the answer to the question as well, Chris. She's a bright girl, your daughter, because that is part of the problem as well, is that the idea of securing the safety of everybody is certainly not the credo or the battle cry of any of the big players in these matters. It's certainly not the aim of the Israeli government, as they literally razed to the ground the homes of entirely innocent Lebanese people most recently. And it's not any stretch of the imagination the goal of the terror leaders, of the Islamist terror leaders either. They don't want safety for everybody. They want victory. They want domination. And there it is. And that's why I think that the decision to set these two stories on top of each other in The Guardian today, the Finchley Reform Synagogue and the rise in anti-Semitic incidents was so powerful. It was so powerful and so wise, but also speaking to a world that we don't really inhabit yet. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need to join this conversation. I want to catch up with Aggie Chambre shortly. Hopefully we'll have time for some more calls as well on exactly what's going to happen in the House of Commons this afternoon when Keir Starmer gets to his feet.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And we may return to the conversation that we've been having about the curious curtailment, silencing, reluctance, I think. A lot of you talking about being frightened of coming forward to simply say that you abhor anti-Semitism and condemn Israeli activity in Gaza, whether you choose to use the word genocide or not. And I don't know why that is, but it is footballification, isn't it? At least at entry level. But it is at 3:30 today that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, will get to his feet in the House of Commons. An event that feels less urgent today, to me at least, than it did on Friday, but is still, Aggie Chambre, LBC's Deputy Political Editor, quite a moment.
Quite a moment indeed. And I think you're right. I think it does feel slightly less urgent than it did on Friday when Labour MPs, who are the most important audience at 3:30 today, were absolutely incandescent with rage. I think the things that have happened to make it feel slightly less urgent is Labour MPs have been reminding each other, reminding themselves that there isn't a clear successor. They've also spent the weekend knocking on doors because, of course, we are 2 weeks out from those local elections. And lots of them have told me that hasn't come up a lot on the doorstep. And also we're 2 weeks away from the local elections. So what a terrible time they say it would be to get rid of their leader. But it is still urgent, it is still important, and they are still very, very angry. The Prime Minister's argument this afternoon is going to be that he and Parliament should have been alerted sooner to the fact that security officials did not believe that Lord Mandelson should have access to secret. Who should have told him?
Who's he going to have beef with? Because he's sacked Ollie Robbins, so is he carrying the biggest can of all?
Absolutely, yes. So despite the fact that he's been sacked, he is still the one who is going to be carrying the can. And of course, we will hear from him at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
So that will be in time for my show.
Yes, indeed. So the Prime Minister is basically going to say, look, the Foreign Office should have told us, Ollie Robbins should have told us. It's not entirely clear, James, whether Ollie Robbins had seen the full vetting.
Someone must have seen it, Aggie.
Someone must have seen it. Well, quite, but there are all of these questions that don't seem to actually have been answered yet. But the Prime Minister's point is that the reason that the Prime Minister found out about this was because somebody from the civil service did tell him. So the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary Kat Little did tell the Prime Minister last Tuesday. And we know that that did happen. I think everyone I've spoken to does believe that that was when he did find out, because not only that they published minutes from that meeting, but we've literally seen him sort of being told in that meeting last Tuesday. But the point from the government is, well, if Kat Little could have told the Prime Minister, then couldn't someone else have told the Prime Minister? They've also sort of got this document from 2010 that said no law stops civil servants sensibly flagging UK security vetting recommendations.
I have a theory.
Go on.
Don't say it like that. Like you're indulging me.
No, I want to hear it.
Give me a lollipop. I think that I think everyone relaxed when the announcement of Mandelson's appointment was greeted with such universal approval. I just think people started paying rather less attention to the detail than they would have done otherwise, and then something comes back and says, oh, he hasn't been vetted. You're like, oh, well, we can't go and rain on this parade. Everyone's delighted. Everything. The perception that the Prime Minister wanted it, which may or may not have been true. Morgan McSweeney did. So the Downing Street want this to happen, which means the civil service does what the civil service always does and tries to bend towards the will of the executive. And B, the idea that this is actually a really popular thing that he's done. Well, hey.
And lots of people said, oh, what a smart choice.
Yes.
Yes.
And that might explain why attention was lower than the rest of us, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight. My attention to detail might have expected. I don't know.
I think one of the problems for the Prime Minister, to your point, is that Peter Mandelson was announced in December 2024, and the vetting actually hadn't been done at that stage. And one of the things that's been dug out today by Sky News is the fact that in that first tranche of documents that we got in the humble address, Keir Starmer was told by Simon Case, who was then the Cabinet Secretary, that if you want, there are two options on how to proceed. If you want a political appointment, then you should give us the name of the person you would like to appoint, and we will develop a plan for them to acquire the necessary security clearances. But before appointing them.
Yes.
That did not happen because he was appointed December 2024, and the security vetting happened January 2025, and that's when he did not pass that security vetting. So that chronology is difficult to explain, is going to be difficult to explain at 3:30.
I've got another theory, is that you probably subconsciously find yourself thinking, well, he's been Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, hasn't he? So why do we need to vet him? So there might even have been a bit of complacency in place there as well. But the Simon Case thing feels pretty significant. But as we said at the outset, not significant enough to upset the apple cart fatally.
Yes. But again, it is difficult for him that there were, that vetting had not been done when he was appointed in December 2024.
None of which would matter if he'd passed the vetting.
True.
Albeit belatedly. So there's so many ifs and buts here.
Yes.
It's extraordinary. But yeah, why did you ignore Simon Case on this? Would be a hard question to answer.
Hard question to answer. And also, it does come back to that point, that sort of so-called original sin of appointing Peter Mandelson when, yes, they didn't know that he was going to fail this vetting. What they did know was that he was had been mates with Jeffrey Epstein, and that he did have links to Russia and China. Those were flagged in due diligence checks before he was appointed in December 2024. So, and there were loads of Labour figures, loads of Labour MPs who thought it was a bad idea to appoint him. To your point, there were lots of people in the Labour Party who actually thought it was a brilliant idea, and Trump's a tricky character.
And beyond. And beyond. A lot of Starmer's enemies thought it was a brilliant idea as well, although they're sort of reverse ferreting and pretending that they didn't. Private Eye's done a very good job of as it always does, of rounding up the reverse ferrets and the not quite as spectacular as Nigel Farage's reverse ferret that we stumbled across last week with regards to Ollie Robbins, but still pretty spectacular reverse ferrets as well. And does he then get questioned? Does Kemi Badenoch come back at him with questions? And do we know what the timescale is, how long it goes on for?
So he will make his statement, he will make his arguments. Kemi Badenoch will then respond to that. He will then respond to Kemi Badenoch, and then there'll be questions from the floor. So that will include his opponents and also questions which I think could be more damaging from his own side, from Labour MPs. I mean, I spoke to one Labour MP earlier who said they might not turn up because they were so cross about it. And they said, I can't say anything supportive, so I might not go. And then said, he has not got a clue, which I think is one of those charges being levelled against this man who is supposed to be this competent figure and lots...
I said, yeah, absolutely. That ship has sailed. Missed the process. Absolutely no chance. And also missed a lawyer. If he was my lawyer, I'd have fired him on the spot on Friday. He said, well, I didn't realise he hadn't passed his vetting. Sorry about that. That's not good. Aggie, thank you. Will we be taking it live, do we know? Have you consulted Sheila Fogarty? No? Well, tune in to find out. Stay tuned to find out. But I'm sure we'll be hearing from Aggie again before the day is over. Back to this question. A lot of you, really a surprising number of people picking up on this point, which is hard to understand. You and your callers have nailed it. Thank you. There is no side for the people in the middle. There is nobody in the media representing the humans who believe that both things are wrong. We're talking about anti-Semitism and the activities of Benjamin Netanyahu's government in the Middle East. We need more representation from these people. A lot of your recent callers should have more of a voice in public discourse, but in the world we live in today, you're either left or right, black or white, and it's no good just being motivated by humanity. There you go, Danny and Crawley, the pressure's on, don't blow it. What would you like to say?
Oh, that is pressure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
So I'm sort of looking at this from a more general angle, and I think perhaps sometimes we're allowing the loud voices to affect us too much. And when I say us, I'm talking about the people who can think about more than one thing at once. And essentially, it's almost an extension of the footballification, right? No matter what you're going to say, there's going to be a response of, you're an anti-Semite, or if it suits them, they might even start saying you're Islamophobic if it's their argument,
Yeah, well, I've got a letter accusing me of pro-Israel bias in front of me as we speak, but and it's my job to take some of it, well, never take it flippantly, but to be confident when it's ridiculous and wrong, whether it's Joel's accusation of anti-Semitism earlier or whether it's this letter accusing me of a pro-Israel bias. But if you don't do this for a living, it can be quite frightening to be on the end of some of these characterisations.
Yeah, it can. And I mean, I've come across it myself plenty, even in personal conversations with people who I love dearly. Yes. They just jump to, it's almost like they've been programmed to jump to those accusations. I mean, if anyone wants an example of someone who handles it so well, Zach Polanski's Instagram is amazing. Yes. You've called me this. It's obviously nonsense. I am not that. So I'll just tell everyone that you called me it and show everyone how silly you are.
And I mean, Zach Polanski, a Jewish man who is fairly outspoken in his condemnation of Netanyahu's administration. So he kind of proves in many ways the embodiment of the point that you're making. Thank you. It's an excellent way to draw the conversation to a conclusion. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free global pledge. I had an unhinged headline, I had a missed info, I had all sorts of bits and bobs. Eleanor gets so cross with me, I just completely forgot. And she even sticks it in front of me on a big screen as a reminder, and I still managed to gloss over it. You can listen back on our free global player app or the LBC app, all the gubbins, a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits from my LBC show every day, and Full Disclosure, which was the last 2 episodes have been particularly lovely, even though I say so myself. So download the app for free from your app store. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.